ground, we implement the highest degree of monitoring in order to ensure the safety of the public.
Has care in the community failed? I mean, it seems oxymoronic to say that it's care in the community in this case. We know that the number of psychiatric care beds has been slashed from 52,000 back in 2001 to 24,000 now. I've anecdotally, because I wrote my column about this in The Telegraph yesterday, received quite a lot of correspondence from people saying the situation with care in the community is dire. People aren't being adequately monitored. Was it a mistake to close down all of those mental institutions?
I don't think we should go back to those days when we had those appalling institutions where we just lock people away and forget about them, and not just mental health people, but autistic people and disabled people. Horrific way to treat individuals, and you know I campaign on that a lot.
I know.
However, I think if we move into a more community-based approach, which can be really good for many, many people who are on the spectrum and on that scale of mental health, we have to remember there will be a small but significant number who will continue to pose a danger.
Okay.
And that's why monitoring is so important.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and for the next 3 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me in the next hour, broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly, and also Director of Climate Media Coalition, Donach McCarthy. But in a few moments' time, we'll be going head-to-head in a clash with GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and also political commentator Suzanne Evans. Well, here's what else is coming up today. Would you advise Lee Anderson to join Reform UK? As Nigel Farage says, Lee Anderson would be welcome in Reform UK, so should he join the party and finally break loose from the Tories? Then, should politicians have bodyguards? As it's revealed, private companies are providing MPs with security after intimidation by pro-Palestinian activists. So, should we increase the security for our elected representatives? And is there any place for diversity and inclusion in the army? I think we all know the answer to that. Only 10 female recruits started the Infantry and Royal Armoured Corps basic training last year. So is it realistic for these inclusion targets, which impact the strength of our armed forces? And then are Labour leaders hypocrites? Again, we know the answer to that one too. Angela Rayner pockets a tidy profit from a sale of a council house that she bought under the right to buy, a policy that she now wants to scrap. So are Labour leaders guilty of double standards? And then we'll finish off this hour with Trump. Is he right to be hard on Prince Harry? As the Republican front-runner attacks the Duke of Sussex for his betrayal of the late Queen and pledges to clamp down on his immigration status, should Trump go after Prince Harry? Well, that's coming up in the next hour. Tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GBNews. But before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Very good afternoon to you. I'm Pip Thompson in the GB newsroom. Labour is demanding assurances that suspended MP Lee Anderson won't have the whip returned. The former deputy chair is still refusing to apologise for saying that the London mayor was controlled by Islamists. Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Jonathan Ashworth has now written to the Prime Minister to confirm that he won't be allowed back into the party. Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden says he does not believe Mr Anderson is Islamophobic and told Camilla Tominey that while it was right to remove the whip, he could not say whether it would be returned.
Is he going to be allowed back into the Conservative Party if he shows more contrition?
Well, that's a matter for the Chief Whip, but we set out the reasons why the whip was drawn was that failure to apologise. That's a matter for Lee Anderson.
You can't rule out him returning, having the whip returned? He may have the whip returned, will he, if he apologises?
No, I certainly wouldn't rule that out, but that's a matter for the Chief Whip.
Another debate on Gaza will be held in the Commons after the chaotic vote last Wednesday. The SNP says it will take up the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle's offer of a meaningful debate on a new ceasefire motion. There was uproar after he allowed MPs to vote on a Labour amendment, leading to calls for his resignation. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn says his party will seek to move the debate forward that will push Parliament to support what he describes as concrete actions. The UK launched another round of airstrikes overnight against Houthi targets in Yemen. In a joint operation with the United States, 18 sites were hit across 8 locations. The Ministry of Defence says precision-guided bombs were used against drones and launchers. It follows a surge in attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea. It's the 4th time the UK has been involved in strikes against the Iranian-backed group since mid-January. Migrants have been intercepted trying to cross the Channel for the first time in a week. More than 230 people were found on 5 small boats and were later taken to the Border Force Processing Centre in Dover. Sources suggest that as many as 12 boats could attempt the dangerous crossing today to take advantage of the brief window of better weather. An action group has won its fight over plans to house asylum seekers in Cumbria. Despite a serious housing shortage in the Millom area, 8 properties were earmarked for 40 migrants. It sparked backlash in the community, with police forced to increase patrols after one house was vandalised. In a letter seen by GB News, the Home Office has now ruled that the site is not fit for asylum seekers. Dean Myers from Millom Communication Action Group told us it's a huge relief.
The community's just been totally confused. We didn't know who was actually coming into the HMOs. No one consulted us, and it just sparked a bit of anger, I think.
Donald Trump is another step closer to becoming the Republicans' presidential nominee. It's after he beat Nikki Haley in her home state of South Carolina, claiming 60% of the vote. It's his 4th straight primary win, despite being engulfed in legal problems.
An even bigger win than we anticipated, and I was just informed that we got double the number of votes that has ever been received in the great state of South Carolina. So that's pretty good. So it's a record ×2.
For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, let's return to Nana.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next few hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. But now it is time for The Clash. And joining me going head-to-head in a clash of minds is GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and also political commentator Suzanne Evans. So let's kick things off. Remember, you can join in gbnews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GB News. First, Lee Anderson has been offered a place in the Reform Party by Nigel Farage after he was stripped of the Conservative whip. Nigel remarked that the party would open up its doors to saying, I just think Lee has a very good heart. He's still relatively new at politics. He's had a few ups and downs, but I think his heart is in the right place and he'd be a massive help to the cause. He'd probably feel happier in Reform than he is in the current Conservative Party. So would you advise Lee Anderson to join Reform UK? Right, let's see what my clashers think of that. I'm going to start with you, Susanna.
Well, of course, I'm someone who was asked by Nigel Farage to join UKIP a few years ago. So Lee's, I suppose, in a similar kind of situation, although I hadn't been chucked out of the Conservative Party at that stage, which, of course, is effectively what's happened to Lee. Although I suspect if he decides to stay with the Conservatives, it will only be temporary. So will he do it? I guess that's up to him. There's nothing to stop him doing it. People get very exercised about people jumping parties, but what they forget is that Lee Anderson was elected as an MP as Lee Anderson and not as a Conservative. He might have had Conservative on the ballot paper, but when it comes to electoral law, it's he who was elected. So effectively, he has the right to be in whichever party he chooses to be, or no party at all. Is it worth his while? I don't know. He's not got a very big majority as a Conservative. He's got short of a 6,000 majority. The local independents are snapping at his heels. He might not feel it's worth the risk. He might think he'll struggle to get re-elected as a Conservative, but perhaps he'd struggle even more at Reform. They're not exactly at the moment, riding high in the polls. Reform is popular among a certain wing of the population.
I think where Lee Anderson is in Ashfield, I think that they probably snap at him if he joins Reform. I think
he might well.
I think Ashfield, they've elected the man, not the party. But what do you think, Nigel?
Well, I think that Nigel Farage is right. He probably would be happier in Reform than he would be with the Conservative Party. It really depends on what Lee wants to do next. I mean, I think that unless he apologises...
Why should he, though? He's not sorry about...
Well, he's clearly not sorry, but what we now...
Say it just to make people...
What we now know is that this wasn't a slip of the tongue. Otherwise, if it had been, he'd have apologised for it.
But why should he, though, if he's not sorry?
Well, I mean...
even if you said he has to apologise and then we'll give it back to him... But then it's just a disingenuous apology that people are calling for.
Well, it would seem to be the fact he hasn't apologised. And that's what I mean. If it had been a slip of the tongue and he thought, I didn't really express myself terribly well, I would have chosen those words differently if I'd had a chance to, that would be fine. I mean, at the moment, Lee Anderson doesn't have any political career left. So without an apology, he won't have the Tory whip, it won't be restored, he won't be able to stand in Ashfield at the general election.
I don't know if that's true, though, because we've had several cases before when people have lost the whip. They haven't necessarily apologised, but it's been restored. I'm thinking, for instance, in the Conservative Party, of those MPs that decided they were going to oppose Brexit. They all lost the whip. They all were taken back into the party without having to apologise.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't all taken back. That's the point. Some were taken back.
Some left.
Yeah.
But it can happen then, so it's...
Well, you could restore the whip, but in a situation like this, we've actually got a real issue about saying sorry. A bit like Jeremy Corbyn is now out of the Labour Party. So,
but there are lots more reasons why Jeremy Corbyn was out of the Labour Party. I mean, Lee is saying what a lot of people are thinking, but haven't been dared to express it.
OK, but I mean, that obviously it's a value judgment whether you think what he said was Islamophobic and racist. Personally, I do. And obviously the Conservative Party, the Chief Whip, has taken the same view, which is why he lost the whip, unless he effectively retracted those words and said sorry for saying them. So when it comes down to the original question, why not join the Reform? Why not join Reform? Again, the same problem applies, that Reform, even if they maintain their current support at around 10-13%, they won't return a single MP to Westminster after the general election.
I think that's right, but perhaps he's taking the view that he's done his time in politics. He's got a very high profile here on GBNews. He's a very popular presenter. Maybe he's decided he's had enough after one short term in office. That is not unheard of. He might be very comfortable at home in Reform. He might feel he has more of an ideological connection with the Reform Party rather than the Conservative Party, as it has become. I like to think that a lot of us have achieved a lot in politics without actually being elected. It's possible.
Won't he be, though, if he does say, OK, he switched to Reform, won't he be their only MP in Parliament now? Because until the end of the Conservative
Yes, that's
term.
right. I mean,
so he'll be in Parliament. And if he wins his seat with Reform, then he could be an MP.
He would carry on,
well.
yes.
And I think he's more likely to keep his seat if he leaves the Conservative Party and joins Reform, would you not say?
Well, I mean, certainly he would remain... he can change parties while he's an MP. He would then be the MP for Reform all the way through to the general election. But at the moment, the way the polls are looking, under the first-past-the-post system, he probably, almost certainly, wouldn't get elected.
He might have a better chance if he did what Douglas Carswell and Mark Reckless did when they left the Conservative Party and joined UKIP, and they stood down and held by-elections in their constituencies. And, of course, both of them were originally returned to Parliament in those
And Douglas Carswell did win at the general election with the one UKIP MP. Yeah. But bear in mind, you had 15% in those days of the vote.
I don't know.
So
I think, looking at the two parties that seem almost exactly the same, the Tory Party and the Labour Party feel like two socialist parties, which is something that Richard Tice alluded to. I think that actually Lee Anderson might probably have a better chance to win his seat with reform, because I don't think the Tories are going to get very far. But so what do you think? GBviews at gbnews.com, or tweet me at GBnews. We'll carry on the theme with MPs, because for fear of attack, more and more of them are using private security to provide them with close protection in their constituencies, amid warnings that the Israel-Hamas conflict is a generational radicalising moment. So should politicians automatically be given bodyguards? I'll pose this to you, Nigel Nelson.
Not automatically, no. No, what should happen is that there is a security review every year by the police. They decide which MPs are under threat and what the security arrangements should be for that MP. So, for instance, Northern Ireland secretaries tend to get protection for years after they leave office. Roy Mason, who was a Labour Northern Ireland secretary, managed to keep it up for 30 years, and he did it because he liked having a car to drive him around the place. So he did it on the basis of making an anti-IRA speech just before the security review, and so he kept his bodyguards. As for other MPs, if the threat warrants having a bodyguard, yes, they should have one.
But how do you measure that, though? Do you wait? Because, for example, someone like Sir David Amess, nobody would have even thought that he needed any protection, and obviously we know what happened to him. So to Tobias Ellwood, people camped outside his house with pro-Palestinian protests and things like that. Other MPs have had their homes, their constituencies firebombed and things like that. We're acting afterwards.
It's an assessment, and it's an assessment that's done by security services, based on intelligence, done by the police based on the threat that they perceive it to be. So, no, you're right, it's not an exact science, but you get some idea of MPs who are particularly under threat. And
that's Cox, the ones I've listed, though, would probably not be on the list, is the point. So if you think about it, like Jo Cox wouldn't be on this list of supposed security checks, and Sir David Amess wouldn't have been on, and Tobias Ellwood probably wouldn't be on. So that's why I asked.
I think this is a very difficult one. I agree with Nigel. I don't think MPs should get bodyguards automatically, but I think there are clearly circumstances that the security services or the police do come to know about, and then I think it's inevitable. Nigel Farage always had bodyguards, which of course UKIP and his private backers funded for him, because he was clearly threatened on a daily basis. I was with him on occasion when I saw a mob try to get to him, and it was absolutely terrifying. But I'm also really a little bit cross about this too, to be honest, Nana, because who caused the problems of MPs not being safe? Particularly in the current climate, you've got massive anti-Semitism, you've got rise in Islamophobia as well. You've got MPs who are under attack, quite often from terrorist threats. Who let these people into our country?
Well, some of them we've grown ourselves. Some of them we've grown ourselves.
We have grown some of them ourselves as well. And how often do we hear of attacks and they're known to the authorities? So why weren't they locked up? Why weren't they prosecuted? Why weren't greater
steps taken? Well, because that's not how the system works. At the moment, MI5 have finite resources. So they have a list of people, around about 2,500, who stay on that list and are kept a fairly close eye on. The trouble is that's the maximum they can get to. So when a new threat comes on the horizon, they have to drop one of the old ones. So when that old one comes back and launches a terrorist attack,
ridiculous situation where we're not even allowed to talk about this threat, which is exactly what we've just been talking about Lee Anderson, because he's in this position where he's talked about a particular issue. Now, you might not agree with him or not, but I absolutely defend his right to say what he wants to say. We have got a problem in this society. There is violence everywhere. And in a sense, talking about whether or not MPs need bodyguards is not actually addressing the real issue. The real issue is how the heck has this country got to a situation where we have constant death threats against MPs, where we feel they need to have bodyguards. There has been a massive shift towards violence and intimidation and terror in our society. And I think, it sounds a bit trite, but I think a lot of that's come from social media. I think the time has come now to say nobody can be anonymous on social media. The vitriol, the hatred, the horror, the threats, you have no idea.
I go along with that entirely.
And I think we should stop that.
The only point where I would disagree there is what we have to deal with is the immediate threat, and that's the immediate threat to MPs at the moment. When it comes down to the cause of it and how to deal with that, that's a bit more of a long-term effort. Really.
It is. Again, I suppose you could say, so we give all MPs bodyguards, what happens then? The criminals in our society are probably going to go after their families. I think that's a danger as well.
Do you really?
But
they would do that
some
anyway.
people
Look,
are
if
so
somebody's
nasty and so
well,
horrible,
look at those
and
people.
we know they've done it in the past.
But look at those
anyway.
people outside Tobias Elwood's house, which I have no idea whether that was allowed. I'm sorry. People trying to justify, oh, it's OK, because, I mean, what did you think of that, Nigel? Do you think that's acceptable?
No, it's not acceptable.
For people to protest outside your house?
No,
You don't think
it is not acceptable.
Nobody
I mean,
thinks it's acceptable. Why did the police think it's acceptable?
MPs are ordinary citizens who have families and they should be protected. Protesting outside Parliament is a different matter, certainly not outside someone's private home.
It's ridiculous. I have no idea. Imagine, I always say this, I keep saying this, imagine me going to an ex-boyfriend's house with placards and flags and a loudspeaker and a couple of my mates and harassing him at the doorstep whilst he's... I'd be arrested.
Yeah.
I'd be arrested, so why weren't they? Yeah. It's ludicrous. Well, listen, you're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, as Angela Rayner profits from a council house sale scheme that she wants to scrap, our Labour leaders hypocrites. But next, as it's revealed, only 10 female recruits started infantry and Royal Armoured Corps basic training last year. Is there any place for diversity and inclusion in the army?
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Francis, Just Stop Oil have in the past broken the law. I remember distinctly the Dartford crossing. That ended up with 2 jailed, I believe, if I remember correctly. Is it ever justified in your view?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I would have to say yes. I mean, we're trying to preserve my life, your lives, the lives of your family, and it's not just the planet that we're trying to protect, it's the lives of millions of people. And, you know, we know from history that we have to break the law in order to put pressure on the government and to be listened to.
No one would doubt your sincerity in your views. You genuinely believe in what you fight for. But there are others who think differently. For example, there are Islamist extremists who believe that people will go to hell unless they convert to Islam. They will sincerely, perhaps, break the law in order to force people to convert. In their view, they might be saving people's lives for eternity. There might be abortion activists who say that babies are being murdered and to save their lives we need to break the law to stop people having abortions. Why do you get to say that your moral conviction is the one that's right and other people's individual moral conviction are those that are wrong?
So what's really integral to the Just Stop Oil campaign is the fact that it is a non-violent campaign. That's what separates us from the examples that you've just given. We're absolutely dedicated non-violence, both as a tactic and as a principle. So though we might be breaking the law...
If individuals take it upon themselves to break the law for whatever their course is, surely the way that we decide what society wants in general is democratic and within the law.
Well, of course, we know also that protest is absolutely integral to maintaining and upholding a democracy, and in particular, non-violent protest. I mean, I really can't express to you how severe this situation is, and I'm sure you know this.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On Mark Dolan tonight in My Big Opinion, we're living in an age of intolerance and mob rule. At this point, our very democracy is on the line. In My Take a 10, Prince William has made a huge mistake by commenting on the war in Gaza. He should stick to opening hospitals and kissing babies. Plus, Channel 4 star Kim Woodburn on the legalisation of abortion. And the top author who's written biographies of Ken Dodd and Larry Grayson. We're live at 9. On Mark Dolan tonight, in My Big Opinion, we're living in an age of intolerance and mob rule. At this point, our very democracy is on the line. In My Take at 10, Prince William has made a huge mistake by commenting on the war in Gaza. He should stick to opening hospitals and kissing babies. Plus, Channel 4 star Kim Woodburn on the legalisation of abortion, and the top author who's written biographies of Ken Dodd and Larry Grayson. We're live at 9. On Mark Dolan tonight, in My Big Opinion, we're living in an age...
I thought it was Mark Dolan again. Get him off. He's on tonight, by the way. This is GBNews. It's just coming up to 23 minutes after 3 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and digital radio. This is The Clash. And joining me for a head-to-head in a clash of minds, political commentator Nigel Nelson and also political commentator Suzanne Evans. Right. Well, let's do this. Next topic. Defence chiefs have been accused of undermining combat effectiveness after it emerged that the military has 111 diversity champions. Yes, 111 diversity champions and advocates. And this comes as the decision to allow women to join the frontline army fighting units has been described as a failed exercise in political correctness after the government figures revealed that only 10 female recruits started infantry and Royal Armoured Corps basic training last year. So is there any place for diversity and inclusion in the army? I want to start with you, Suzanne Evans. I mean, just very briefly.
Very briefly,
We don't
no.
want to take the bins out. I don't want to take the bins out. I don't really want to fight in combat unless I can wear stilettos, my really good-looking sort of vest and like...
You're right, they probably wouldn't recruit me.
Exactly. And I'd be running around going, hey! So that wouldn't work
think
out.
You would be. But no,
I wouldn't actually.
I mean, this is a specific job. You know, I do think this idea that you can be anything you want, you can do anything you want, is an absolute nonsense, actually. And there's nowhere where you see that more bluntly, I don't think, on kind of showbiz shows like The X Factor, when people who want to be superstar singers and they actually can't, they're tone deaf and can't sing a thing. You know, there are some jobs that people are good at and some jobs that people are bad at, and we all have to do what we think we can do. And the army is like that, and it's a particularly important job because you're talking about the security of our country, and you're talking about people. You need to be fit, you need to be brave, you need to be strong. And Nana, yeah, you probably wouldn't cut it at my level, though. I think you could surely have another job
all
in
the
army.
things you just said, I've got all of those. I'm fit, I'm brave, I'm strong. So do you know what I would actually love? I would love to be like I would do territorial army or something like that. Yeah. I would love it. I love the assault courses and everything. I love all that.
We'll do it.
But I'm not going to because I've got a nice job here, Nigel.
Oh, right, OK. On Sundays, you have a bit of a problem going out to go and do your training, wouldn't you? Yeah. Should there be diversity in inclusion? Of course there should be. And every organisation should have a diversity and inclusion policy. Agree with Suzanne that there is a point there. It mustn't reduce the operational effectiveness of the army. I get that. There's no reason why women can't serve on the front line. I mean, the Israeli army, for instance, is largely made up of young women. But when it comes down to these 111 diversity officers, the kind of thing they're sorting at is LGBT. There's no reason why a gay man or woman can't fight equally well.
What's that got to do with fighting? That's my question.
Well, it's got to do with recruiting.
Yeah, but what's that got to do with it? Like, I get it. Oh, you want some people who look like this and some people who look like that. Actually, I would argue that those people are the real racists or the real ones if they're looking for someone with specific characteristics, irrespective of their ability, because that's what it ends up being.
You're just you're doing the same as you would do in any organisation. You're just trying to broaden the kind of staff base, and that's what diversity and inclusion is about.
But the only person that needs that kind of training, or the only person that needs to be, I think there should be blind CV entries, actually, because where that prejudice will exist would be, say, in the HR department, where they might be recruiting cookie-cutter people who look exactly the same way they are, but everyone has a sort of inbuilt thing where you recruit people who are similar to you in some way.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's necessary. I think there should be blind CVs, and you don't need to make specifications as to what someone needs to be black.
And also to say, look, everyone's welcome in the army. You think you can cut it in the army, you apply. That doesn't take 111 people to put that message out. It's insane. Army recruitment targets haven't been met for the last 13 years. That is an
appalling indictment of just how badly the recruitment's being done, and arguably, I think, possibly also just how badly our politicians seem to have run down our army and made it weak and made it ineffectual and put this focus on diversity and inclusion and, you know, can you be a female, can you be gay in the army? Yes, you can. But for goodness sake, let's start talking our army up again, making it an attractive, wonderful career, something that people can be proud of, instead of going on and on about how an army is something terrible, we don't need it, the kind of snowflake idea that war is dreadful. Well, I'm sorry it is dreadful, but sometimes it's necessary.
Well, the other thing is there are 111 of these people, and the bottom line is the reason why the women probably don't want to join the army is because there's levels of sexism and you've got stories of abuse.
But that's what they're there for.
Yeah, but
they're there to deal with that kind of thing.
But 111 of them, no. What you need are people who actually change policies within the army to make sure that women or anyone can join, and there are people
this is their job. I mean,
no, diversity and inclusion just means you want more black people, you want more white people, people without tattoos on their face.
That's the overall aim. But the job of these diversity champions is they've got particular specialties to make sure the army isn't discriminating against certain people. I mean, when it takes...
discriminating against everybody, because nobody's joining it. They've been a failure.
I'm not talking about that, though. That's not about discriminating. What I'm saying is that if they made the army a place for people to want to be, so, say, give veterans better pensions, look after the staff...
Absolutely,
look after the staff who are there, look after their well-being and mental health, instead of spending a fortune on these 111 people that are just going to look for certain visual characteristics that you have.
But a lot of it is about things like that.
No, it's not, though.
What it is, I mean,
you're making that up, Nigel.
No, I'm not. All right,
you don't know that.
Go back to the example I was giving of a gay soldier, that up until 2000 it was a criminal offence to be gay in the armed forces, for which you could be court-martialed and end up in a military prison.
Right, well, we'll move that policy, isn't it?
Well, they have. They've changed all that, but it takes a while to get rid of the residual bias against gay people, and that's what these people are there to do. So there are other areas where there's been a problem. We can't get people from the Commonwealth to join the Intelligence Corps because they're not passing the security vetting. They're not passing it because you have to be resident in Britain for 5 years before you can take the security vetting. Now they're looking at, can we reduce the time? This seems to me sensible kind of reforms. That's what these people are doing.
Well, that was one of it, but I'm sure they were loosening some of the other checks as well, which is not good. I just don't get why you need to be saying someone needs to be a woman or someone needs to be this or gay or straight or we need some trans people. And it's not working, is it? Because the people are looking going, I don't want to be in this thing because there'll be no pension for me. If something happens, there is, but it's not very good. If something happens to me, nobody's going to look after me. That's what the army should be focusing on, paying people better.
I know people in the armed forces who are actually increasingly annoyed at the emphasis on the kind of woke culture.
Exactly.
They're furious about it, actually. And what I'm hearing is, you know, the sort of hierarchy talk about what we're doing for diversity and inclusion, but actually it's not really like that, and actually it's fine. And most women who go into the army can put up with a bit of sexism. It's not the end of the world. It really isn't.
But why should they?
Well, I don't think you can... Listen, I don't...
I mean, where do you draw the line?
Exactly, it
never
never
ends. A bit of flirting, is that right or is that wrong? Most people meet their future partners in the forces when they join up. So, you know, you can push it too far, this, and it becomes a terrifying place to work when you're not even in the front line.
Well, listen, this is the thing. If they're going to do that, just spend more money on combating things like that rather than saying, we want females, we want black people, we don't want people with tattoos on their face, we don't want any white men in the Air Force or whatever it was they were doing. Maybe perhaps they should just focus on making the army a place for everyone and anyone so that it's a good place to be. But right now, this is GB News. It's coming up to 32 minutes after 3 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. We are live on TV, online and on digital radio. We will continue with The Clash after your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. It is 3:31. I'm Pip Thompson in the GB newsroom. Labour is demanding assurances that the suspended MP, Lee Anderson, won't have the whip returned. Today, the former deputy chair still refused to apologise for saying that the London mayor was controlled by Islamists. Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Jonathan Ashworth has written to the Prime Minister to confirm that he won't be allowed back into the party. Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden says it was right to remove the whip from Mr Anderson.
I don't believe that Lee Anderson is an Islamophobe, but words matter, and the choice of words that he used, the choice of words that he used was not appropriate. He was given the opportunity to apologise, didn't take that opportunity, and therefore the Chief Whip took the decision to remove the whip from him.
The SNP says it will take up the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle's offer of a meaningful debate on a new Gaza ceasefire motion. There was uproar after he allowed MPs to vote on a Labour amendment last Wednesday, leading to calls for his resignation. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn says his party will now push Parliament to support what he describes as concrete actions. Migrants have been intercepted trying to cross the Channel for the first time in a week. More than 230 people were found on 5 small boats and were later taken to the Border Force Processing Centre in Dover. Sources suggested as many as 12 boats could attempt the dangerous crossing today to take advantage of the brief window of better weather. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, it's back to Nana.
This is GB News. Thank you very much, Pip. Right, next up, as Angela Rayner makes $48,500 on a property she bought under the right to buy, is she a hypocrite for wanting to pull the ladder up for the others?
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Claire, you want to talk by cars growing by a couple of centimetres a year?
Yeah, well, 1 centimetre every 2 years.
Okay.
It's unrelenting because the people are so fixated on the big SUVs. The sales have gone through the roof, and yet it's James Nix, the analyst for Transport and Environment Campaign, said the author of the report on the trend said, spurred on by sales of the largest SUVs, vehicles are getting wider every year. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, it means that our roads weren't...
Comfortable ride, beautiful engines, smooth. I mean, it's luxury, it's gorgeous.
Well, as I know, I used to have 2, but I don't...
You used to have 2 SUVs?
Well, 1 SUV at a time, but I had 2 brands of them. But I'd no longer drive in London now because I just don't see the point, because of the ULEZ, because of the, you can turn down a thing and get fined.
Parking spaces, whatever.
Yeah, the growth in car size also causes issues for their drivers. The report found that largely luxury SUVs, which are about 2 metres wide, no longer fit in off-street parking.
That's true.
They also leave too little space for passengers to get in and out of the vehicles in typical off-street spaces, and they're about 2.4 metres wide, the report found. And I'll tell you, I was stuck in a bus last night trying to get home, and the buses couldn't move because the streets were too crammed with all of these massive cars either side.
Chelsea tractors.
And it was gridlocked.
Yeah, but maybe they're not the problem, maybe the buses are the problem.
The buses take people to their place of work and get them
I'd like
home.
to know when, because when I go through London, all I see is empty buses.
Well, you're lucky. Every time I'm on one, they're full.
Well, they're obviously only full at rush hour. You see, the thing is, property developers, when they do high-rise car parks or, they build a multiplex cinema and there's a car park attached to it, that's not my fault that I can't fit into their space. It's their fault. So
well, it's all driven by money, isn't it? The more spaces that they have,
exactly.
the more people they can get.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
37 minutes after 3 o'clock. If you just tuned in, where have you been? It's fine, though. Welcome on board. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. We're going head to head. Joining me to do that is political commentator Nigel Nelson and also Suzanne Evans, political commentator. You're a political commentator, right?
I am.
You are. Right. Well, listen, next up, though, Angela Rayner. Now, she's been accused of hypocrisy after it was discovered that she made £48,500 of profit on her ex-council house thanks to the right to buy policy. She now wants to reform. Now, there's obviously no discussion that she's done anything wrong by that, but critics say that the Labour's deputy leader wants to pull up the ladder to make it harder for other social housing tenants to benefit in the same way that she has. Her actions follow a long-running criticism of Sir Keir Starmer, who wishes to put a VAT on private school fees, even though his grammar school was converted into a fee-paying school when he was still a pupil there, and I think his fees were paid. So, Nigel and Susanna, what do you make of this? I'll start with you, Nigel Nelson.
Well, first of all, this idea, we know we're in election year when stories like this come up and Angela gets accused of hypocrisy, which is complete nonsense.
Well, why? Why is it nonsense?
It's nonsense because everybody, we were saying earlier that MPs are people too, and they go along with the government system of the day. So it may well be that they would like to change tax rates, but they pay the tax that actually the rate as it is now. All Angela Rayner was doing, she wasn't even an MP at the time, she took advantage of Margaret Thatcher's right to buy. Her bit was 25% off, that was the rule there. The Tories have changed that in 2012 to 60% off. When Labour come to power, they will review whether that figure is actually fair. The fact that she did all this nearly sort of 20 years ago doesn't seem to me particularly hypocritical. She had every right to do it, as you said, and why not?
Well, because now she's an MP and she's in a position to make it easier for people like herself and the things that she benefited from. And also the Labour Party is supposed to be helping the sort of working class, as it were. Why is she putting up the drawbridge, Suzanne Evans?
Well, that seems to be exactly what she's doing. Now, she's obviously done nothing wrong, as Nigel said. That's quite clear. Personally, I think Margaret Thatcher was wrong to sell off all the council houses. I think we needed those houses for people who were poor, who couldn't afford a market rent, needed somewhere to live. I think it was one of the biggest mistakes. In this sense, on this one, I am, actually. I think it was wrong because we need those houses.
But the fact that she made it so that they could afford it, the poorer people were able to get up top on the ladder. So why is that wrong?
That's fine, because we didn't replace every council house we sold with a new house. So basically what happened is that a house was taken out of the marketplace, and now, as you know, we have a massive housing shortage, which we're never going to be able to fulfil, particularly not. We've still got 750,000 people coming into the country every year. So Angela Rayner's done nothing wrong. Hypocrisy, yes, I think she is a hypocrite. Labour have constantly talked about, as you say, stopping this discount and making it smaller when they've already benefited. It's exactly the same as the grammar school thing that you mentioned in your introduction. How many Labour MPs sitting on the green benches went to grammar school and now actually don't want others to benefit from that same education? And it's a nasty, vindictive politics. And I have to disagree, Nigel, with you saying, there's an election coming up, so people are talking about this where there's nothing in it. I'm afraid this is good old-fashioned journalistic bread and butter, actually. Delving into the nitty-gritty of people's housing arrangements always comes up, and it's always something.
Well, yeah, but it's interesting. It's election year that Michael Ashcroft has decided to write this book where the revelation is contained in this particular year, and takes a huge interest in Angela Rayner's sort of personal circumstances. The point I'm making is, why can you not want to change a policy just because you may have benefited down the road?
Because it doesn't look good, does it? It stinks,
maybe it doesn't look good.
Why hasn't she been honest about it? Why hasn't she? When she was talking about this, why didn't she say, I have to admit, hands up, honestly, I benefited from this. I regret that now. I'll give some of the money to charity. She hasn't done any of that, has she?
It's a lot of that about,
She's just said, She's kept quiet about it. She's not talked about it. It's been Lord Ashcroft's investigation that's brought this all to light.
Yeah,
I think if you're going to push a policy that it benefits you in some way, you have to be honest.
But it doesn't benefit her. I mean, all this is in the past. So I can't see, and I can't see why she shouldn't have done it if that was the existing system at the time.
We're not saying she shouldn't have done it. What I'm saying is she should have been open and upfront and honest enough to talk about it instead of it all having to come out in a book.
Well, I mean, I don't think it was ever a secret, but, I mean, whether you actually talk about all your personal circumstances when you're trying to bring in new laws, I don't know. I mean, it's only very recently we've seen a bit of the tax returns of people like the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition.
Because the law changed, and so they now have to publish their tax returns.
But it's a recent thing. I mean, that people didn't do that before.
No.
And I'm not against the idea of transparency. I just think it would be a bit odd to actually say, right, to list everything you've done for the last 20 years in case it has a bearing on a policy you're about to bring in.
But that's not the point, is it? The fact is she's looking at a policy that will take away something that she's benefited from directly, which has enabled her to do a lot of the things she's done, and that's actually beneficial.
She's looking at the 60% discount. What she benefited from was a 25% discount.
And it also seems that she, despite the fact she got married and her husband had another house, it also seems she kept this council house that she'd bought until a period had gone by where she could make the full benit from it, despite the fact that they'd got another property.
And she may not have been living in it.
So
but again, there's nothing...
It's not just
nothing illegal.
She hasn't
done anything illegal.
It's not illegal, but she was clearly very canny in the way she did this, and I think she should have been much more open and honest about it up front.
Well, I think
arguably,
what a canny Deputy Prime Minister.
Mama didn't raise no fool. Mama didn't raise no fool with Angela Rayner. To be sure, yes, she's made some good moves for her, but I just think it's a bit... it doesn't really leave a very nice taste in people's mouths if you've benefited from it, and then those who are coming after you don't benefit on it because you've changed the rules. So that doesn't look good at all. But what do you think? GBViews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GB News. Next up, though, as Donald Trump accuses Prince Harry of betraying the late Queen and pledges to crack down on his legal status, in the US. Is he right to be so hard on Harry?
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
47 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. It is The Clash, and lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts. We've been discussing lots of things. We spoke about Lee Anderson. John says Lee only said what the majority of us public are saying. Steve says, I think Lee Anderson should join Reform. The Conservative Party are a treacherous bunch that have abandoned thousands of ex-Conservatives like me. Yes, I'm sure. Lee says Lee Anderson is a breath of fresh air. He is outspoken in articulating the views of a number of people in the country, and many of whom have no time for Mayor Khan. And he says Lee Anderson should leave the Tories. They do not deserve him. And Carol says, yes, I definitely think Lee Anderson should join Reform UK. He speaks how it is for British people, and I think he has guts to say what everyone else thinks right now with this government. It's the London Mayor that should be suspended and sacked. He's running London to a cesspit. A lot of people. We're looking for other people, other views. If you think that think differently, please get in touch. We'd like to hear them. But so far, that's not what I'm getting. Donald Trump, next up. Trump has said that Prince Harry will be on his own if Trump, wins a second term this year. The former president criticised Harry for what he called an unforgivable betrayal of Queen Elizabeth II. Mr Trump said that Joe Biden's administration had been too gracious to the Duke of Sussex since he moved to America in 2020. So is Trump right to be hard on Prince Harry? I'll come to you, Suzanne Evans.
Oh, crumbs. I think we've all earned the right in Britain to be hard, and possibly in America as well, to be hard on Prince Harry. I mean, there's no doubt he's been running our country down. He's trashed the royal family. Sour grapes doesn't even come close to, I think, what we're seeing from Prince Harry. And he's obviously now embroiled in this legal case, which has been brought in America because they're saying he shouldn't be allowed to stay in the USA because he's confessed in his book, Spare, to taking drugs. He confessed to taking marijuana, cocaine and magic mushrooms. Now, of course, for anyone else in America, they'd be turfed out of the country and not allowed in if they confess to taking drugs. So I think there's a very good argument here. Why is Harry still allowed to stay there? Arguably, he shouldn't be. Or perhaps everyone else that's confessed to taking drugs and has been kept out of America now has a very good argument to be let in.
Nigel Nelson.
I think that Prince Harry should be treated absolutely like anybody else. He should neither be favoured for his visa application, nor should he be penalised because who he is. If the rules are you keep your application private, then I think it's quite right that his application should be private. Equally, he shouldn't be getting particular help from the current administration. So he should be an ordinary citizen. When it comes to the drugs bit, there is a waiver on the visa where you can say yes, I have taken drugs. You ask for the waiver and they give it to you. For all we know, he did that.
I don't think so.
Well, this is what they're trying to find out. The reason for trying to make the visa application public in the public interest is, did he answer yes to that question? Or did he say, no, I've never taken drugs? In which case, we've had the problem of what he said in the book.
But then they're saying that his lawyers are currently saying that with a book, you're allowed to embellish.
Yeah, I thought that's a weird argument. Look, that is genuinely a weird argument.
Not good enough.
The one thing I would be surprised about is if Harry would have confessed to taking drugs in the book, knowing that could jeopardise his stay in America.
Yeah, because he has said that some of the things he's taking are now used as part of his recovery and all that. So, and in places
but
where
he may have got the waiver, is the point I'm making. He actually knows he's got the waiver, but there's no reason why the public should see his application.
But I do see the public interest here issue, because if you did go to America and if he didn't have that waiver, and then he confesses in the book, I think people have a right to know. I really do. There is a very strong public interest argument here, I think. And as for immigration authorities saying, well, you know, applications are private, come on. Harry doesn't want anything about his life kept private. He's laid it bare for us all to see, including, you know, what he does with certain types of day cream on certain parts of his body.
God,
I mean, the extent to which this man has gone to basically say, I don't want any privacy, is quite astonishing, quite astonishing.
Well, yes, I mean, he does want privacy. One of his basic things is the...
But he doesn't, does he? Or else he'll keep his mouth shut.
His constant battle is against press intrusion. I'm not saying that's right, by the way.
I've got to stop you there when you say he does want privacy. If you want privacy, you probably wouldn't do something on Oprah Winfrey, who is a global TV star, to expose your family. That's not privacy. If you wanted privacy, you'd probably not do a Netflix all-encompassing documentary.
But what Harry is
no, with the film crew, or you know, yes, I know what you're going to say. Oh, and you also probably wouldn't write.
What am I going to say?
You're going to say that he wants it on his terms.
Oh, but that's everyone.
You were going to say
everyone wants it on their terms.
Well, exactly.
What he's talking about is he's running this campaign against press intrusion. I'm not in favour of that campaign, by the way. I think he deserves much of the press intrusion he's got. But everybody's entitled to a measure of private life. The more public you are, then the less privacy you are going to have.
Well, that's his own fault, then, isn't it? By your very admission, it's his own fault.
Yes, but it doesn't mean your personal private documents should be made public as a result of that.
Well, it depends whether you make up stories or you say something that would then perhaps look like you've lied about something that's official, like on your visa. So there is a reason. We're not just... people aren't just saying, oh, we want to see Harry's visa application.
No, that's right.
We're saying it because he has admitted to taking drugs in his book Spare, his tell-all memoir where he trashed his family. And now, suddenly, the Americans are going, well, if you took drugs before you got here,
that's right.
Did you write it on the application form? So we need to know.
But why do we need to know? If he lied, the American authorities, the immigration authorities know that, and they would then deport him from the country.
Well, we need to know.
That's my point about treating like anybody else.
There are others who've been deported. I think was it Nigella Lawson who didn't get in because of her, you know, her drug taking.
Yes, yes.
So
this is Trump's point, isn't it? Is he being given favourable treatment?
Yeah.
And again, that's something else that the American public deserve to know.
So would you kick him out then, Nigel?
Well, if he lied on his visa application form, yes. But, I mean, that can be done by the authorities. What I'm saying is that we don't have to see everything he put down on his application to enter America.
I don't care about that. I just want to see the bit where if he's lied.
If he's being protected because of who he is...
And I'm saying he shouldn't be. Yes, I'm saying he shouldn't be protected or given any favours.
How do we know whether or not he's being protected unless we see that form? We can't tell.
Well, we know that it's White House lawyers who are fighting the case on his behalf. So quite clearly he's being protected. Quite clearly he's getting special treatment.
These are the White
Trump
House...
is right about that. He shouldn't be having it.
These are the White House lawyers who, as you said, oh, just because he wrote something in a book doesn't mean it's
true. They're the ones, yeah.
Really?
Which we seem to all agree that was a pretty lousy case to put forward to a court.
Well, I actually really worry about the calibre of White House lawyers if that's the kind of argument they're putting forward.
Well, I wouldn't hire one of them.
Well, Prince Harry's hiring a lot of these people. It's costing him a fortune. So, Suzanne, would you chuck him out then?
If he's lied, yes, absolutely. You'd have to, because, as Nigel quite rightly said, you cannot treat him any differently from anyone else. And anyone else would be kicked out.
Yeah, well, they'd kick me out in a heartbeat, wouldn't they? They'd be like, she lied in a form, get her out of here. She wrote a book and then said stuff. What do you think? Would you kick him out? Yeah, they're all saying, yeah, we would. I can see them out. They go, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, don't blame you. Well, listen, if you've just joined me, welcome on board. There's still loads more to come. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, still to come, my monologue. Now, I decided to do it on Shamima Begum. The reason being, because, of course, with the situation that we're all currently in, with the fear of all sorts of violence and obviously the terrorist fear, should she be allowed to come back to this country? What do you think? gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GB News. You can also download GB News app for free or stream the show live on YouTube. But first, let's get an update with your weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Southern districts are bearing the brunt of the rainfall today. We've seen it sweeping its way in, some heavy pauses at times, and it will stay very persistent, particularly in the southeast right throughout tonight. With this additional rainfall adding on top of what we've already had this winter, we could see some disruption in places. Elsewhere, some clearer spells for the night, some showers pushing in across Scotland, falling as snow over the higher ground areas might bring some icy stretches, as well as temperatures begin to tumble off patchy frost across areas of Scotland and the far north of England as well. Temperatures just holding up a touch more underneath the cloud in the southeast, but it is going to be a very dreary wet start here, and it will take some time for that rain to eventually clear its way off. Quite a brisk northeasterly wind pushing its way in will make it feel
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
So a new poll has revealed that Gen Z or Gen Z, I don't know how I'm supposed to say it, and British boys and men are more likely to believe that feminism has done more harm than good when compared with older respondents. So the polling also found that a quarter of UK males aged 16 to 29 believe it's harder to be a man than a woman, with 1 in 5 looking favourably upon controversial influencer Andrew Tate. 37% of them also agree that the phrase toxic masculinity is unhelpful. So, with Gen Z boys increasingly holding this view, has feminism done more harm than good? Let me know your thoughts. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com, tweet me @gbnews, and make sure you take part in our poll. But I'll bring you those results shortly. Going head-to-head on this tonight, our author and commentator Anna May Mangan and YouTuber and social media influencer Pearl Davies. Both of you, thank you very much. Pearl, I'll start with you. Has feminism done more harm than good, especially when it comes to these Gen Z boys?
Yes, it has. Feminism really has turned into a bunch of crybaby women that want to complain that we're not given equal opportunity when really women are given more opportunity than men. And so, yeah, I would say feminism is a hate group and it's a bunch of crybaby women.
Anna, would you like to come back to that? Crybaby women feminism, apparently.
So we've got a right lad with us tonight with Pearl and her opinions, haven't we? How could it possibly do harm? Pearl wouldn't do. I hope you vote. I assume you do. I hope you're not chained to the kitchen sink at home. I'm not sure if you've got a job, so I don't know very much about you, but you're probably, if there's a bloke doing the same thing as you, you're probably earning less than him. So of course feminism is something that it got us the vote in the first place, and it's still doing a power of good. It's just whingy men, and actually I changed that. They're lads, they're not men.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and for the next few hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's Donica McCarthy, Director of the Climate Media Coalition, and also Danny Kelly, a broadcaster and journalist, yes. Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you very much and good afternoon. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Labour's demanding assurances that suspended MP Lee Anderson won't have the whip returned. The former deputy chair is still refusing to apologise for saying the London mayor was controlled by Islamists. Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Jonathan Ashworth has now written to the Prime Minister to confirm he won't be allowed back into the party. Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden says he does not believe Mr Anderson is Islamophobic and told Camilla Tominey while it was right to remove the whip, he couldn't say whether it would be returned.
Is he going to be allowed back into the Conservative Party if he shows more contrition?
Well, that's a matter for the Chief Whip, but we set out the reasons why the whip was drawn was that failure to apologise. That's a matter for Lee Anderson.
You can't rule out him having the whip returned. He may have the whip returned, will he, if he apologises?
No, I certainly wouldn't rule that out, but that's a matter for the Chief Whip.
Another debate on Gaza will be held in the Commons after the chaotic vote on Wednesday. The SNP says it will take up the Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle's offer of a meaningful debate on a new ceasefire motion. There was uproar after he allowed MPs to vote on a Labour amendment, leading to calls for his resignation. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn says his party will seek to move the debate forward that will push Parliament to support what he describes as concrete actions. The UK launched another round of airstrikes overnight against Houthi targets in Yemen. In a joint operation with the US, 18 sites were hit across 8 locations. The Ministry of Defence says precision-guided bombs were used against drones and launchers. It follows a surge in attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea. It's the 4th time the UK has been involved in strikes against the Iranian-backed group since mid-January. Migrants have been intercepted trying to cross the English Channel for the first time in a week. More than 230 people were found on 5 small boats and were later taken to the Border Force Processing Centre in Dover. Sources suggest as many as 12 boats could attempt the dangerous crossing today to take advantage of the brief window of better weather. A local action group has won its fight over plans to house asylum seekers in Cumbria. Despite a severe housing shortage in the Millom area, 8 properties were earmarked for 40 migrants. It sparked backlash in the community, with police forced to increase patrols after one house was vandalised. In a letter seen by GBNews, the Home Office has now ruled that the site is not fit for asylum seekers. Dean Myers from Millom Communication Action Group told us it's a huge relief.
The community's just been totally confused. We didn't know who was actually coming into the HMOs, no one consulted us, and it just sparked a bit of anger, I think.
And Donald Trump is another step closer to becoming the Republicans' presidential nominee. It's after he beat Nikki Haley in her home state of South Carolina, claiming 60% of the vote. It's his 4th straight primary win, despite being engulfed in legal problems.
An even bigger win than we anticipated, and I was just informed that we got double the number of votes that has ever been received in the great state of South Carolina. So that's pretty good. So it's a record ×2.
For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Nana.
Thank you, Tatiana. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Shamima Begum wants to come back. Of course she does. After running away with her mates to Syria in 2015 at just 15 to join ISIL and marry an ISIS fighter, where it was reported she sewed on suicide vests and actually said that she wasn't bothered or fazed by watching beheadings, Shamima Begum wants to come back to the UK, which is no longer her home, by the way, because of her citizenship, which has been revoked. Although we are still paying for her legal appeals. She's apparently received nearly £250,000 of legal aid since 2021. She gave birth to 3 kids, all of whom died in curious circumstances. Now the war is lost and she is in a camp in Syria. She's realised she's better off in the UK. I could have told her that before she left. The other day, Shamima lost her court appeal to challenge against removal of her British citizenship.
For these reasons, we unanimously dismiss the appeal. It could be argued that the decision in Miss Begum's case was harsh. It could also be argued that Ms Begum is the author of her own misfortune. But it is not for this court to agree or disagree with either point of view. Our only task is to assess whether the deprivation decision was unlawful. We have concluded it was not, and the appeal is dismissed.
So all three judges unanimously ruled that it was lawful on national security grounds. Some people argue that it was unfair, that her citizenship was revoked and that it's a two-tier system. So if you have dual heritage, you can be sent back to another country. But if you don't, you get to stay here because you can't make someone stateless. Easy solution. Don't leave the UK to join an anti-the-West death cult. People are saying that because she's got darker skin, she's being judged more harshly because apparently black girls are seen as more mature. But she's not black, is she? And I'm not sure this applies to lighter-skinned brown women. In any case, the race card doesn't work here because the Home Secretary at the time, Priti Patel, as well as the subsequent Home Secretary Sajid Javid, who actually took away her citizenship, as well as Suella Braverman. Notice anything here? They're pretty much the same colour as Shamima. You can't blame this on white people. The only person responsible for her demise is Shamima herself. If you've committed heinous crimes elsewhere, that country has the right to try you there. And I suspect the authorities in Syria probably want to make sure that she gets punished properly. They've seen the weak, soft-touch justice system here. And as for the notion that she was groomed, well, maybe at the start you could argue this could have been partially the case, but her planning was pretty calculated, and subsequent interviews showing her lacking of any remorse or empathy make this difficult to accept. Anyway, her citizenship was stripped in 2019. 4 years later, she was an adult then and is now a grown woman at 24. And she only wanted to come back when ISIL fell. Her lawyer said that they will keep fighting and will appeal to the Supreme Court. And if they fail there, then they'll try the ECHR. Well, she's no longer a citizen, so she should fund that herself. The British people need to be protected now more than ever, especially from high-risk individuals who have exposed their hand. With pro-Palestinian protests and anti-Semitic messages being allowed in our capital, MPs being hounded outside their surgeries and homes, and what with that Parliament changing procedure for fear of any comeback, we should not be subjected to having to pay for or deal with someone who abandoned the UK and, if reports are to be believed, was complicit in acts of terror. I say good riddance to bad rubbish. Well, before we get stuck into the debates, here's what else is coming up today. For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, has our politics been captured by fear? Sir Lindsay Hoyle said that his decision to allow a Labour amendment to the Gaza ceasefire vote was sparked by concerns over MP safety. So is our democracy threatened by intimidation? At 4:50, it's Worldview. We'll cross live to Paul Dudridge, the host of the Politics People podcast, in Los Angeles to get the latest on Donald Trump with his sweeping victory in South Carolina. Then stay tuned at 5. It's this week's Outside as we go outside Ukraine with journalist Andrew Drury and an exclusive interview with Vitaly Klitschko. He's the mayor of Kyiv. That's after 2 years of war. Have a listen.
The biggest mistake to think the war for Wales doesn't touch me personally. It's the biggest mistake. This war can touch everyone. One of the worst-case scenarios, the front line right now in Zaporizhzhia, in Energodar, is one of the largest nuclear stations in Europe. Yeah. The nuclear station a couple of months ago was on the fire, because in the front line, if explosion will can be tragedy times bigger than Chernobyl. In this worst-case scenario, this war can touch everyone in our planet. And that's why we have to do everything to stop.
Well, that's coming up in the next hour. You won't want to miss that. As ever, tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at gbnews. Right, let's welcome again to my panel climate scientist and columnist Donica McCarthy, as well as broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Right.
Well, you know how it goes. Welcome, Donica, by the way.
Thank you.
Nice to have you on board. I'll start with you, Danny Kelly. Shamima Begum.
Nice to have me on board too.
Well, you're here every week.
Great to see you both. Shamima Begum, look, I defer to the experts if they think that it was a lawful decision to strip her of her citizenship. What confuses me is that the girl was born in London. And when I use the word girl, I use that loosely, like I would say the boy. It doesn't mean that they're under 16, because I get that. She was born in London, but of Bangladeshi heritage. So why lump it on the Syrians? I don't know. I feel slightly conflicted about that. But if the experts say potentially she is still radicalised, that's where I have my concerns, that this woman is radicalised still. Now, she can pull the wool over people's eyes, and she can wear baseball caps, and she can wear sunglasses, designer footwear and dresses in this Syrian camp. Now, does that necessarily mean that she's been de-radicalised, or is she just sort of like swinging the lead, trying to get back home, trying to get a one-way ticket back to Heathrow Airport? The problem is, of course, is that if she is still radicalised, she's not alone. There are thousands of Muslims, radicalised Muslims, hundreds of which are probably walking the streets of the capital right now as we speak.
But you don't want more, do you?
No, you don't want another one, no. But then we need to look at it objectively and say, OK, at 15 years of age, she was, if you like, indoctrinated. She had her mind poisoned by this religious death cult. So does she still, for example, is she still of the mindset that if you sew a suicide vest onto a bomber who goes and kills innocent people, that she's going to spend the rest of her life in paradise? Is she still of that ridiculous mindset? If so, we can't let her back in.
Well, she was asked about that, and she said that she wasn't bothered about the beheadings and things that were happening there. And
but what's she like now? What's her mindset now like?
Well, you see, that's the thing. Who wants to take that risk? Donica?
Sure. I think the first of all point is that she was underage. She was 15 when she made that decision.
But she's not
and I think
now,
to actually punish somebody for life
but she's
for
not
an action I agree, but the action she took was when she was underage.
Yeah, but had she been 6 months
we
later,
should judge
she would have been 16.
Yeah, but she wasn't. She was underage. So that's the first point, I think. We're judging somebody for life for something they took underage is not something that our legal system normally does. And the second point I would like to make is I think the concept of citizenship should be sacred. And the idea of giving a government minister or a government the power to take our citizenship away is terrifying.
Well, if you behave in an uncivil, uncitizen-like manner, what's the problem?
What's the problem is that you should then be tried in court and punished by our state.
She will be in Syria.
No, she won't. There isn't a legal system. She's in a camp.
That's unfortunate for her.
No, but if you're a British citizen, you have the right to have British...
She's not, though, is she?
Well, because the government took it away from her.
Exactly.
So I'm saying you shouldn't have the right to do that.
But she's not a British citizen. Do you still think we should carry on paying for her?
No, I think that we should actually try her here. Bring her back, put her to the courts.
Why should we?
Because she's a citizen.
She's not anymore.
If you take
she's
away...
not a citizen.
Yeah, but that's authoritarianism. That means
you
and me and Danny are at risk of our citizenship.
Well, depends what you do.
And that's the fundamental bedrock of our society.
If you start sewing suicide vests onto people, I'm more than happy for you to be released from this country as a citizen.
No, I think you should go to jail.
Well, yeah, in a jail in that country that you've done it in.
I think also, Donica, there are differences here in...
Like Monica.
Oh, sorry, forgive me, Donica. Sorry, it's Donica like Monica.
Exactly, that's
not Donica.
Outrageous. I told you that. You're not supposed to say that on there.
Oh, is it not?
Oh, is that for off air only, is it, Monica and Donica? OK, I don't think you can compare... OK, I don't think you can compare the crime of somebody who has been poisoned ideologically, motivated by a warped misinterpretation of, generally speaking, a peaceful religion. I don't think you can compare that ideology with something that motivates, for example, the murder of Jamie Bulger.
I'm not comparing it.
No. But what you're saying is that because she's under 16, we need to treat her in the same manner as someone else who committed a murder, like of Jamie Bulger under 16. I think it's slightly different because what motivated her was this religious ideology, and that's my concern. You see, you can go and spend many years behind bars and you can come out quote-unquote rehabilitated, like one of the murderers of Jamie Bulger, the other lad's still in prison, constantly getting recalled because of other legal misdemeanors. But my concern is that once you cross that boundary of sewing suicide vests onto fighters, then if you are still of that radicalised mindset, I think that is not comparable to saying, well, what about other under-16s who commit heinous crimes?
The point we're making here is a crime is a crime, whether it's a foul murder or whether it's terrorist. And you're a citizen. And what you're doing, Danny, is you're crossing the line of saying that a specific ideology is the government's entitled to step in and take away our citizenship, rather than allow us going to court, and that's terrifying.
Well, no, I think terrifying is an exaggeration.
No, losing my
My point is that you can't rehabilitate someone's ideology. That's my point.
Terrifying is somebody who sews on suicide vests. Terrifying is not what Danny said. Terrifying is somebody who does that.
I agree. We're all agreed. We're all agreed that ISIS is a terrible ideology. We're all agreed that terrorism is a crime. But what we're not agreed on is what should happen to a citizen who commits a crime. And I'm arguing that allowing the state to take a citizenship away on the basis of which ideology they approve or disapprove makes us all at risk. What we should do is go to court.
It makes us all at risk if we sew on suicide vests and go off to another country and join a death cult. But I'm not going to be doing that. So, because I've realised I could have my citizenship revoked, so I'm not going to do that. Perhaps you should have thought about that.
Because you are dual nationality, because your mum and dad are Ghanaian.
Don't send me back to Ghana, but I don't... Ghana's not a bad country, to be honest.
Were you born in Ghana?
No, I was born in Newcastle. I'm a Geordie.
Exactly. So it's horrific to be sent back.
But see, the point of this is, I get it, that people can say, yeah, but if you're not a dual national, then you'll stay in this country. Or they might not allow you to come back from wherever you are. That could be what happens, but that's not the point here. The point is you've committed a heinous crime, so therefore you need to be punished. And if taking away your citizenship is a good punishment...
A deterrent as well.
It makes second-class citizenship of around 6 million people in this country.
Not really.
Why? Why are you conflating this with 6 million Muslims?
No, I didn't. I say Muslims.
Well, who are the 6 million then?
The 6 million people are the people with dual nationalships.
Well, no, I'm not a dual national, but you mean dual heritage. So
No, it doesn't mean no dual nationals.
The issue here is Shamima Begum had they claim she's got two nationalities. Bangladeshi because of her parents and British because of where she was born. And so there's around 6 million...
That's why I used heritage.
Yeah, so there's around 6 million people
they're not all they're not going to fight with ISIS, though, are they?
There are 6 million people in this country
who are dual nationals.
And we are saying that they can have their citizenship.
If they committed a crime like that, yes.
The rest of the country can't.
If they committed a... I agree that there is a disparity there. That was my starting point. I felt conflicted.
I already said that in my monologue, but so what? The bottom line is don't commit acts of terror like that, and that risk is not there.
No, to an extent, I agree with Donoghue. The woman was born in Bethnal Green, not Bangladesh.
Yeah, but if you... Listen, imagine this, right? You commit a crime in America, right? Do you get brought here automatically to be tried for that crime?
You do your porridge in America.
Exactly, there you have it. So Shamima, she did a crime there.
Yeah, but I get to come back, though. I don't get my nationality stripped.
If you do something really bad, you could be ended up on death row and you could be executed. So you might not come back.
So for those 6 million people who may not have ever spent any days in the country of heritage, exporting to a country where they don't speak the language...
They're only there because they're fighting for ISIS.
You want me to have sympathy for somebody who's strapped on a suicide vest?
No, I'm not actually asking for sympathy.
And you're saying that they should be tried... Listen, I'm saying revoke the citizenship. If she's got dual nationality, they don't want her in Bangladesh either, actually. So that's the thing.
Well, you put words into my mouth. I'm not actually saying I don't sympathise with her. But I want the book thrown at her, but not her citizenship taken away. Throw the book at her, but don't take her citizenship away.
Throw the book at her in Syria. Great. Right, well, you're with me. I think we're agreed on that, aren't we? They're agreed with me. They agree. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, Worldview will cross live to Los Angeles, host of the Politics People podcast. You try saying that, Paul Duttridge. We'll give you the latest on what's going on there with Donald Trump. But next, it's time for the Great British Debate this out. And I'm asking, has our politics been captured by a fear of Islamism? I've got a poll up right now asking you that very question on X. Please cast your vote. Has our politics been captured by a fear of Islamism? Some of your thoughts at gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GBNews. Cast that vote.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great footage. So you're right in the thick of it there. What's the mood on the ground?
Well, I've left there now. I've actually now come to that EU Council summit that I was talking about. It's still pretty chaotic. The entire city of Brussels has been completely clogged with these tractors, sort of 3 abreast in most of the roads across the city. The people of Brussels aren't particularly happy. I mean, this is sort of reminiscent for some people of the Just Stop Oil protests, you know, people gluing themselves. People are unable to get to hospital appointments, and there's a lot of upset about the destruction that's happening on the streets of Brussels today. But on the other side, there's also the protests, which the farmers are saying that EU green laws simply are not able to fit with what they need to do to keep their businesses going. And just before the protests happened, we saw the European Commission actually make some concessions to the farmers' protests. And this is on the demands that were put on them to set aside somewhere in the region of 5% of their land for regrowing for biodiversity. A lot of the farmers have said that's not possible, and the European Commission has said that they can delay that coming in. So they have won a small concession with these protests.
And Jack, there's a feeling as well, a huge dissatisfaction that the European Union has managed to find 50 billion euros in aid to send to Ukraine, and yet farmers in particular are on the receiving end of net zero targets, taxation on diesel and endless red tape. So many farmers, Jack, saying they're measuring ditches to see if they have to drain them or not. There are minimum requirements on the width of battery hen enclosures. Endless red tape, as Jeremy Clarkson pointed out in Clarkson's farm in Britain. They've simply had enough, and they're shouting, Ursula von der Leyen, we are here.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
23 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now, before the break, we were discussing Shamima Begum. Let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Ivan says, Shamima Begum is the responsibility of the UK. No, ifs or buts. She was born here. She is a citizen of the UK. At 15, she made a very bad decision, but she was a minor, not at age of consent. Thank you for that. Oh, Reg says, she should never come back. She's a traitor and a risk to our country. John says, I wonder what would happen if Shamima Begum made her way back to France and took a boat to the UK South Coast. The spineless border force would welcome her with open arms. She'd probably be given a hotel, mate. That's what would happen. Honestly, you know that. That's probably the next move. Well, listen, if you just joined us, welcome. Keep your thoughts coming. gbviews@gbnews.com. It's time now for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, has our politics been captured by fear of Islamism? It's a vocal politician, Lee Anderson. He's had his Tory whip removed after he made divisive comments about Sadiq Khan. Now, a former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, claimed that Islamists were in charge of Britain following the Gaza ceasefire debate. So I want to get your thoughts on it. For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, has our politics been captured by the fear of Islamism? Well, joining me now is political commentator Suzanne Evans, and also GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Right, I'm going to start with you, Nigel. Do you think that our politics has been captured by Islamism?
No. What I do think is that because of Gaza, emotions are running high, community tensions are at breaking point. We've seen anti-Semitic crimes go up sixfold. Muslim hate crime has gone up, has tripled since October the 7th. So I think that there is serious stuff going on outside in the country. I don't think that translates into the idea that Islamism has somehow taken over politics.
Well, what about what happened with the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, who changed procedures because he was worried about the safety of MPs?
Yeah, and I think
that's a capturing there, right?
Yeah, I think the safety of MPs is indeed a problem. I can understand totally why Lindsay Hoyle did what he did. If the MPs had behaved better themselves, the system he put in place would have actually gone through. They would have debated all those various amendments
but he
and
changed
voted
procedure,
on them.
Because they were scared of a revolt, weren't they? They're scared of losing
80, I think it's Labour MPs would have voted against the motion.
Well, I mean, what the Speaker was doing was actually looking at the safety of MPs. So,
well, that's what he was saying, but he was told by, I mean, as we understand it, Keir Starmer, suggested that or sort of put a bit of pressure on him.
Well, I mean, there's no evidence for that. I'd be very surprised. I've known Lindsay Hoyle for 25 years, and the idea you could pressure him into something, I think, would be a nonsense.
Well, he's already been pressured into doing this.
I don't believe Keir Starmer would have done it either. I think he would have known better. What I think Keir Starmer did say to him is that there is a risk to a number of Labour MPs if they cannot vote for the Labour amendment, and that's why Lindsay Hoyle then broke with convention and tried to get the Labour amendment tabled, which of course it was eventually, but passed through, and it didn't please anybody. I mean, no Labour MP actually got to vote on it.
Yeah, well, I think you're just describing an example of it, but what do you think, Suzanne?
Let's look at the evidence, shall we? I wish it was just politics that have been taken over by fears of Islamisation, but it is not. It's the whole structure of our society. It's the police, it's the education system. The Rochdale grooming gangs. Turned out it wasn't just Rochdale, it was all over the country. How many years did the police turn a blind eye to that? The hate marches that we have every Saturday. Sadiq Khan is not doing anything about them. The police are not doing anything about them. Jewish people are scared to go into London. Female genital mutilation. It was made illegal in this, and it's mostly practised in the Islamic community, but not exclusively. Made illegal in this country in 1984. It took 35 years to get the first prosecution, and there've still only been 2. Despite the fact that the NHS is seeing 12,000 cases every year. As Suella Braverman said in her recent article, 75% of MI5's caseload is to do with Islamist terror threats, but Prevent only gets 11% referrals for Islamist threats, which says that people in authority are not referring them to the Prevent service. Teacher still in hiding in Batley for showing the cartoon, the Charlie Hebdo cartoon. 2 years he's been in hiding now. The 4 children in Wakefield who brought a scuffed copy of the Quran into school and were suspended. Everybody is running scared of this cohort of people, of this community. And yet, look how quick the police are to arrest a Christian street preacher. Now, I don't like them as much as anyone else. I think they're a bit of a nuisance. But they're very quick, aren't they? What we have in this country now, and I think the evidence I've just shown is incontrovertible. We have a blasphemy law by the back door. Blasphemy law was abolished in England and Wales in 2008. But as far as Islam's concerned, it still operates. I've just given you the evidence. I think it's appalling.
Well, let's ask counter-terrorism expert Kevin Hurley, who joins us now. Kevin, so do you think that our politics has been captured by Islamism?
I wouldn't say politics has been captured by Islamism, but the public sector appears to be, in terms of how, if you like, actors within the public sector, the police, social services, education and so on, are running scared of correcting inappropriate behaviour by people who happen to be Muslims. They stand in fear and trepidation of that. So I think we're not, if you like, completely politically captured, but the people, if you like, who maintain our standards and deliver for us are fearful of criticism, as we've heard with the Rochdale cases, et al. And indeed, some of the action we see in relation to the demonstrations in London at the moment, where people are chanting from the river to the sea, etc., and action is being taken. So I think we're at a point where we need to consider what is going on in the nation in terms of ensuring that police officers, the courts, teachers do their job without fear or favour for any particular belief system or any particular gender, etc.
It would be good if it would work that way, but for some odd reason it's not quite working out that way. Let's now give Nigel Nelson the final word on that, because I believe it is captured by it. I think Suzanne thinks that as well, but Nigel, finally to you.
I think all the examples that have been given are absolutely right. Certainly when it comes to the grooming gangs, that a fear of racism played a part in not dealing with them. Yeah. That doesn't mean our politics have been captured by Islamists. It means there are certain areas where we need to deal with it. When it comes down to policing the protests, that is a matter for the police.
Right. Well, listen, thank you for your thoughts, Nigel Nelson and Suzanne Evans, and also counter-terrorist expert Kevin Hurley. What do you think?
Is our politics captured by the fear of Islamism? GBviews at GBnews.com. Tweet me at GBnews. I'm Nana Akua. We'll continue with the Great British Debate this hour. What do you think? Get in touch. You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, Donica McCarthy and Danny Kelly. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Labour's demanding assurances that suspended MP Lee Anderson won't have the whip returned. Today, the former deputy chair still refused to apologise for saying the London mayor was controlled by Islamists. Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Jonathan Ashworth has written to Rishi Sunak to confirm he won't be allowed back into the party. Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden says it was right to remove the whip from Mr Anderson.
I don't believe that Lee Anderson is an Islamophobe, but words matter, and the choice of words that he used, the choice of words that he used was not appropriate. He was given the opportunity to apologise, didn't take that opportunity, and therefore the Chief Whip took the decision to remove the whip from him.
The SNP says it will take up the Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle's offer of a meaningful debate on a new Gaza ceasefire motion. There was uproar after he allowed MPs to vote on a Labour amendment on Wednesday, leading to calls for his resignation. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn says his party will now push Parliament to support what he describes as concrete actions. Migrants have been intercepted trying to cross the Channel for the first time in a week. More than 230 people were found in 5 small boats and were later taken to the Border Force Processing Centre in Dover. Sources suggest as many as 12 boats could attempt the dangerous crossing today to take advantage of the brief window of better weather. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Nana.
Thank you, Tatiana. Coming up, it's World View time. We'll cross live to Los Angeles to speak to Paul Duttridge, host of the Politics People podcast, to get the latest on the US. But next, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, has our politics been captured by a fear of Islamism? I've got a poll up right now on X or Twitter asking you that very question. Has our politics been captured by the fear of Islamism? Send me your thoughts, gbviews at gbnews.com, or tweet me at gbnews.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Are you across this microaggression story?
I'm across microaggressions. I'm also across XL bullies.
You would not last 5 minutes.
Oh, for God's
So
sake, civil servants, give me strength.
So civil servants have been taught not to roll their eyes. Something you do very well. We both do it quite a lot, actually.
Because it's seen as an act of microaggression. This, by the way, this costs the taxpayer, this training, £160,000. What the hell is going on in our woke civil service? Who cares if someone rolls their eyes in exasperation?
What the hell is going on in our civil service, full stop, if the way that civil servants are communicating with each other is rolling their eyes and looking at their phones? I mean, is the government being run by people who are essentially acting to each other like stroppy teenagers?
But I'm all right with people, because, you see, I would be in defence of eye rolling.
So me too, I couldn't care less.
But do you know why? Because I want people to give me their genuine reaction, as long as it's not deeply offensive. But I want to know how people feel. And what they're being told here, civil servants are being taught, and of course this is an area of employment law, because people are taking cases against their bosses who roll their eyes at them. They're saying they're being encouraged to say nothing and nod their heads to promote transparency and inclusion. Don't show what you really think, just nod your head.
But I think that comes with then saying what you really think, and this is the key problem, and what these courses are trying to establish. And I looked into some of them when I was researching this, and it's not saying hide what you're feeling. It's saying, rather than huffing and puffing and rolling your eyes, if you've got a disagreement with someone, say I've got a disagreement with someone. Because otherwise, you can't have an effective workplace if people are sort of just passively, aggressively huffing at each other.
Why do these civil servants need to be taught this? Why do people need to be taught this? This is just normal discourse in a normal working day. You don't need a seminar on it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, welcome on board. If you just tuned in, where have you been? It's time for the Great British Debate this hour, and I'm Nana Akua. If you just tuned in, welcome. And I'm asking, has our politics been captured by the fear of Islamism? Now, it's as vocal a politician, all of this comes as vocal politician Lee Anderson has had his whip, the Tory whip, removed after he made some divisive comments about Sadiq Khan. And former Home Secretary Suella Braverman claimed that Islamists were in charge of Britain following the Gaza ceasefire debate. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, what's your thoughts? Has politics, in your view, been captured by fear of Islamism? Well, joining me to discuss, broadcaster or director of Climate and Media Coalition. Your title keeps changing, Donica. Donica McCarthy, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Donica, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
What do you think?
The idea that the statement that our politics is captured by Islam implies that our government and, for example, the Mayor of London is ruled by Islamists. That is clearly untrue. The Mayor of London is a popular mayor. He's ruling on behalf of the people of London. Lee Anderson came up with no evidence to state a group of Islamists are controlling the Mayor of London.
I'm saying for fear of Islamism, yeah? So do you think, because remember what happened this week with Lindsay Hoyle, where he changed the motion because he was worried about the safety of our MPs. So that's why the question is there, fear of Islamism. So nobody's saying that there's Islamic fundamentals or anything like that. We're saying that people are afraid to speak because of this. What do you think?
I accept that's the differentiation you're making. That's fair. I don't think that differentiation was made by Lee Anderson when he made the accusation of the Mayor of London being ruled by Islamists. But in terms of Lindsay Hoyle, I have to say I think he was playing politics, dangerous politics with that. Well, it was very clear that Keir Starmer went and lobbied him to get Labour out of a difficulty, and then for the Speaker to use fear of Islam, as the excuse. I'm querying that.
I do think that there's some divisiveness going on, and
I'm querying that.
There's a portion of what you're saying that I actually agree with. Danny Kelly.
I'm reading his comments. I don't actually believe that the Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is that they've got control of Khan and they've got control of London. Thankfully, I don't live in this hellhole of a city. I'm delighted when I drive up the M40 home. I don't like London. London's changed since 25 years ago when I used to come down as a young man for a weekend in London. I don't recognise...
What were you doing on those weekends?
I would be getting up to mischief, as any 20-odd-year-old man would do in London. So I don't know whether he's...
Lots of hair.
I had loads of hair.
I'd love to see your picture with you with hair.
There is a picture on the fridge of me wearing glasses and a full head of hair, which I was going to WhatsApp you about 6 months ago, but then I thought, no, she's going to put it on the telly. So I don't know whether they've got control of Khan. As Donica says, there's no evidence of that they've got control of Khan. What I will tell you, though, is that I was speaking to the Conservative leader of Walsall Council, and GBNews did this the other day. The Islamists stormed Walsall Council chamber. Stormed it and brought it all to a halt. So it's not just London. There is this negative aspect of protesters about Gaza that are storming even local councils, and they're trying to change the way that local councils do their politics.
But do you think this is a genuine fear? I mean, or are people just being a bit over the top?
I don't think there's anything to be fearful. I don't think Khan is in the pocket of his Islamist puppeteers. I don't think so.
I think one of the interesting things about what happened with Lee Anderson and Khan is that the mayor actually has a security detail. I'm an environmentalist in London. I do a lot of cycle campaigning, so I follow the mayor's Twitter feed. The amount of abuse that our mayor gets is quite shocking. And the idea that the mayor is in a way, and I think Lee Anderson's statement has added to that fear that he has of far-right violence against our mayor. And I think we should be proud of a mayor who is from a diverse background, and the culture of attack has got out of bounds, in my view.
No, but I'm not talking about that, though. I'm talking about the fact that there does seem to be some people perceive that there is a fear of saying things or stepping out of turn or saying how you're feeling about something because you will be silenced in some way or other. And part of that fear comes from Islamism. So I'm asking whether you think that our political arena is captured in that respect. And I think that there is some truth in it because people do appear to be afraid to say things. I mean, what happened with the Labour MPs who either voted for a ceasefire or decided not to abstain from the vote? I think that the Muslim Council of Great Britain or one of the organisations said that they're going to stand somebody in a seat in every one of those seats where an MP has either not called for the ceasefire or abstain from the vote.
But that's politics.
Yeah, but that's
democracy, isn't it?
But there's a fear.
That's a democratic system.
What about
if I'm as an MP and people disagree with me, surely they have the right to stand against me. That's British values.
But that's what about Tobias Ellwood then?
What about Tobias Ellwood?
What about the people protesting outside his house?
I disagree with protesting outside people's houses. I think
means that he's going to be afraid to speak just in case that happens again.
Well, where agreement is that we should not be protesting outside people's houses because their family have no involvement. They should not be involved. I do believe you have a right to protest outside the office of an MP if you believe the MP is supporting genocide that you're really upset about.
But then you have to acknowledge then that there is a fear of Islamism because the politicians know, or people like Tobias Ellwood would have been fearful.
I think you're wrong, Donica, to compare Sadiq Khan's security detail and the abuse he gets on Twitter to what happened when baying mobs tried to storm local, for example, in Walsall, local democracy hubs. I don't live in London, but every weekend in London it seems to be overrun by tens of thousands of people.
Hang on, when you say overrun?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm one of those people that are overrunning.
OK,
London.
but you know, whilst you're marching down...
I've done one of those protests with Jewish people.
May I qualify? Let me finish it. When you are walking down these streets, and you're no doubt a very peaceful individual, some of the people who are protesting with you are not peaceful. In fact, they come across as, to me, only watching it on the television, as potentially incredibly violent people, and I wouldn't classify you as that. So when I say overrun, if I'm trying to walk down a street in London with a family, for example, with my 90-year-old father, my in-laws are Jews, they would not feel safe. They would now, you can say that there's a few Jews there in the protest march, and you can say that.
Them.
Yes, and I'm sure you're right, but that doesn't mean that all Jews feel the same way.
And how do you think that people who actually are concerned about the genocide in Gaza feel?
But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about streets being overrun.
British values are free peace.
I'm talking about streets being overrun.
OK, so I don't think it's, OK, we've got to be careful when we start talking about the people in Gaza because we know that everyone would agree that nobody wants to see people dying. But it is a war, and it was started by a terrorist attack. Hang on, sorry, let me finish. Okay. You already are. You don't know what it was. The situation was inflamed because there was a ceasefire there, but it was restarted or reignited, or whatever word you want to use, by a terrorist attack on October the 7th, OK? And there have been other situations where those who are part of this terrorist organisation, Hamas, have said that they will carry on and they'd like to do this again. So Israel have responded, as we did against when it was the 9/11, America responded, and so Israel have responded. They have asked for the release of the hostages, and they said they will stop this. So the fight, and let's not forget that Israel has been bombarded repeatedly before all of this, and the only reason Israel doesn't look like Gaza is because of the Iron Dome. So I just think that when you say that, I think it's wrong. Nobody wants anyone to die, but let's be honest about it. Let's qualify it and put it in its...
What we've got, Nana, is a situation where there was a terrorist attack that nearly everybody on these marches condemn.
Well, they're not, though, are they?
Yes, almost everybody condemned it. And they've asked for the hostages back.
No, they haven't.
But we have to accept slaughtering 36,000
it's a
people
war.
is unacceptable. No, it's not a war.
But it's a war.
How can you? Where's the army? Where is the Palestinian army?
The only reason why Israel doesn't look like Gaza is because they have an iron dome. Let's not forget that bombs are coming from Gaza on a daily basis, and they have.
So can I ask you one question?
No.
One question.
No. This show is nothing without you and your views. So let's welcome our great British voices onto the show. Their opportunity to be on the show and tell us what they really think about the topics we're discussing. Where are we going to? We're going to Lee again.
Bristol.
Does he get to be on twice in 1 week? What's wrong with this? Can't we find anybody else? Lee Harris. What do you think?
Charming.
Look, there are certainly visible signs that it has, Nana. I mean, it's captured MPs who are fearing for their lives. It's captured our parliament. And without a doubt, it's captured the Met Police. It's influencing this country's most important institutions. And all you have to do is look at what happened last week with the absolute farce in the House of Commons, where they literally changed parliamentary procedure because of threats to MPs from Islamist extremists. It doesn't get much more serious than that. Every single weekend, London is taken over by hate marches, and we all, watch Sadiq Khan and the Met Police sit back and do nothing. People are not stupid. We can see, the disgraceful two-tier policing, useless soft-touch policing, I should say, to know that this is directly responsible for what we're seeing. So, going back to what Lee Anderson was saying, I think it's absolutely right that he called out Sadiq Khan. I think he admits in his own words that the way that he put it was clumsy, and I would agree with that. But he is responsible for the totality of policing in London, and he has capitulated. And I think this is partly where this conversation is coming from. It's not wrong to point that out. I think it's absolutely vital that we point that out. So him, and along with Mark Rowley, in my view, should stand down. But they've lost control of London, and that is what Lee Anderson was trying to articulate. So I wouldn't say that it's completely taken over politics. I think that's a bit too far. But there are really serious signs showing that it is absolutely influencing.
But listen, we're running out of time, Lisa. I'm going to have to quickly shift this. But some people might argue it's a democracy, and therefore we balance all views. And if that's the way it's shifting, that's the way it shifts. Lee Harris, thank you very much. He's our great British voice. What do you think? GBviews@gbnews.com. Coming up in the next hour, the Great British Debate. I'll be asking, was Lee Anderson's suspension the last straw? But next, Worldview. We'll get the latest from what's going on in the US with Paul Dudderidge, host of the Politics People podcast.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show. Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we are flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous,
Well,
at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And this is GB News. Welcome if you just tuned in. Where have you been? It's coming up to 8 minutes to 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. We are live on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, earlier we were discussing Islamism and whether you thought that there was a fear and the capturing of it. I will read some of those, but let's quickly go to Worldview now and travel over to the United States and speak to the host of the Politics People podcast, Paul Duddridge, and find out what go on there. Because Trump wins South Carolina, Nikki Haley vows to stay in the race. Why is she staying in the race?
I'll tell you why she's staying in the race, because she's largely funded by the Democrats. And so if she drains Trump of campaign resources just because he has to stay in these pointless battles, it just means it depletes his resources. It's the only strategy they have now. It's the old rope-a-doper. It's Muhammad Ali's rope-a-doper. You just tire out your candidate, tire out your opponent. That's what she's attempting to do. She's being used as a stalking horse by the Democrats.
Yeah, it's not wise, because Trump will not be happy with that. But he's also supporting IVF, isn't he, after Alabama Supreme Court ruled that frozen embryos are children.
Well, this is the little hidden story of the week as far as I'm concerned, OK? We've talked on this a lot. They can have as many shenanigans as they want in these primaries and in the election. It's going to come down to 6 states and it's going to come down to abortion. I'm absolutely 100% on this. And Trump's got a very, very difficult job to win in November. Alabama this week, the Supreme Court in Alabama said that a fetus, a frozen embryo rather, is a baby, is a child. And so there are lots of fertility practitioners leaving the state or stopping practice.
Wow.
This is absolutely huge. I don't know why these conservatives, why these Republicans have to keep shooting themselves in the foot. But anyway, that is now such a hot topic that Trump this week has very almost subliminally stood against Alabama and said, like, no, you've got to be able to have IVF. This is crazy, you know? So it's beginning now. I think it might be too little too late for him to begin undoing the damage of the repeal of Roe v. Wade politically. So that's my big concern. We've talked about this for ages, and so many excited conservatives are going, oh, Trump, the Trump train in November. It's all wonderful. Everybody that's on side is on side. He's going to lose the independents and he's going to lose the women vote in November just because of this, not because of him.
Oh, dear. You know, he doesn't need. You know, he doesn't need this really. But a lot of people want him to win. Now, I know Biden. His fundraising is going well, but I want to quickly get on to Prince Harry because Trump had a pop at Harry. What happened there?
It's great. He didn't mention Nikki Haley in his speech. OK, so he's not mentioned Nikki Haley in his victory speech, but he's found time to mention Prince Harry, just going, what he did to the Queen. I wish I could do the voice. What he did to the Queen is terrible. He's not going to be protected by me. He's been absolutely awful. His disloyalty to the Queen. She's a wonderful woman. She loved me, etc., etc. I do the voice. But so Prince Harry has come out for special mention, special treatment by Trump in a victory speech, basically going, I'm not going to protect him. If I'm president again, I'm not sticking up for him. It's fantastic.
Brilliant. Well, listen, Paul Duddridge, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining me. That is Paul Duddridge. He's the host of the Politics People podcast. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Still loads more to come. Stay tuned. I've got a special guest, Vitaly Klitschko. No, not live in the studio, but Andrew Drury, who interviewed him live in Ukraine a few days ago. Let's get you an update, though, with your weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Southern districts are bearing the brunt of the rainfall today. We've seen it sweeping its way in, some heavy pauses at times, and it will stay very persistent, particularly in the southeast right throughout tonight. With this additional rainfall adding on top of what we've already had this winter, we could see some disruption in places. Elsewhere, some clearer spells for the night, some showers pushing in across Scotland, falling as snow over the higher ground areas might bring some icy stretches, as well as temperatures begin to tumble off patchy frost across areas of Scotland and the far north of England as well. Temperatures just holding up a touch more underneath the cloud in the southeast, but it is going to be a very dreary wet start here, and it will take some time for that rain to eventually clear its way off. Quite a brisk northeasterly wind pushing its way in will make it feel quite cold. That wind will also bring in some showers for northeast England and northeast Scotland, but there will be some sunny spells in between all of that, and into the afternoon many of us will have a fairly fine end to the day. Temperatures around where we'd expect them to be for the time of year. These fine conditions are being brought by a ridge of high pressure that is extending itself across the UK. But into Tuesday, that is slowly going to sink its way southwards and allow this cold front to start moving its way in from the northwest. So starting to see wetter, windier conditions for Northern Ireland and Scotland. That will eventually spread its way into England and Wales later on in the day. But for much of central, southeastern areas of England, it will be a fine, dry start to the morning with some sunshine in there. But it remains fairly unsettled and changeable right throughout the rest of this week. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Chris, what is the preferred way in which the police go about their business at the moment? There's these two strands of thinking: evidence-based policing versus bobbies on the beat.
It's very, very difficult. The problem that police have got, basically, is that they're too thinly spread, and it's too much is expected of them. There's a long list, isn't it? Every month we hear police need to do more about this, police need to do more about that, and police do their best. They're overwhelmed with bureaucracy. I mean, when I was a young PC, if I took a shoplifter in, then I'd be in and out within an hour. You take a shoplifter in now, and you're doomed for the rest of your shift for 6 or 7 hours dealing with the bureaucracy. Police want to get back in those communities because community policing is really the core of policing. But such are the demands on their time at the moment, and the bureaucracy, and the fact that they are struggling now to retain experienced officers. People are hemorrhaging out of the police, and new recruits coming in haven't got that experience, and there's a good chance they may not stay anyway. So there's all sorts of problems. And for the Home Secretary to glibly say he wants more done, frankly, clearly shows he's got no understanding of the pressure police are under, and of course the constant criticism that they face across the board. Very rarely do you actually hear of police officers getting praised for acts of bravery or acts of compassion. So there's a problem with morale in the police force, and clearly a problem with the Home Secretary, who needs to get out there and talk to officers on the front line who frankly are struggling. And last night, of course, was a graphic example.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. Welcome to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. It is 5 o'clock. For the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. Coming up each Sunday at 5, I'm joined by a celebrity, a former MP or someone who's had an extremely interesting career to take a look at life after the job. We talk highs, lows and lessons learned and what comes next on the outside. And this week, it's an Ukraine special as we hear exclusively from the mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko, 2 years after the outbreak of war. And Andrew Drury will be joining me live. He interviewed him, and Andrew is also somebody who interviewed Shamima Begum, so it'll be an interesting watch. Stay tuned. Then, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, was Lee Anderson's suspension the last straw? But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you very much and good afternoon. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Labour is demanding assurances that suspended Tory MP Lee Anderson won't have the whip returned. The former deputy chair is still refusing to apologise for saying the London mayor was controlled by Islamists. Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Jonathan Ashworth has now written to Rishi Sunak to confirm he won't be allowed back into the party. Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden says he does not believe Mr Anderson is an Islamophobe and told Camilla Tominey while it was right to remove the whip, he couldn't say whether it would be returned.
Is he going to be allowed back into the Conservative Party if he shows more contrition?
Well, that's a matter for the chief whip, but we set out the reasons why the whip was drawn was that failure to apologise. That's a matter for Lee Anderson.
You can't rule out him having the whip returned. He may have the whip returned, will he, if he apologises?
No, I certainly wouldn't rule that out, but that's a matter for the chief whip.
Another debate on Gaza will be held in the Commons after the chaotic vote on Wednesday. The SNP says it will take up the Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle's offer of a meaningful debate on a new ceasefire motion. There was uproar after he allowed MPs to vote on a Labour amendment, leading to calls for his resignation. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn says his party will seek to move the debate forward that will push Parliament to support what he describes as concrete actions. The UK launched another round of airstrikes overnight against Houthi targets in Yemen. In a joint operation with the US, 18 sites were hit across 8 locations. The Ministry of Defence says precision-guided bombs were used against drones and launchers. It follows a surge in attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea. It's the 4th time the UK has been involved in strikes against the Iranian-backed group since mid-January. Migrants have been intercepted trying to cross the Channel for the first time in a week. More than 230 people were found on 5 small boats and were later taken to the Border Force Processing Centre in Dover. Sources suggest as many as 12 boats could attempt the dangerous crossing today to take advantage of the brief window of better weather. A local action group has won its fight over plans to house asylum seekers in Cumbria. Despite a severe housing shortage in the Millham area, 8 properties were earmarked for 40 migrants. It sparked backlash in the community, with police forced to increase patrols after one house was vandalised. In a letter seen by GB News, the Home Office has now ruled the site is not fit for asylum seekers. Dean Myers from Millham Communication Action Group told us it's a huge relief.
The community's just been totally confused. We didn't know who was actually coming into the HMOs. No one consulted us, and it just sparked a bit of anger, I think.
And Donald Trump is another step closer to becoming the Republicans' presidential nominee. It's after he beat Nikki Haley in her home state of South Carolina, claiming 60% of the vote. It's his 4th straight primary win despite being engulfed in legal problems.
An even bigger win than we anticipated, and I was just informed that we got double the number of votes that has ever been received in the great state of South Carolina. So that's pretty good. So it's a record ×2.
For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Nana.
Good afternoon. It's fast approaching 5 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly, and also Director of Climate Media Coalition, Donica McCarthy. Still to come, each Sunday at 5, I'm joined by a celebrity, a former MP, or someone who's had an extremely interesting career to take a look at life after the job. We talk highs, lows and lessons learned and what comes next on the outside. And today, my special guest, well, it's been 2 years since Russia's invasion of Kyiv. I'm joined by filmmaker Andrew Drury with a world exclusive. His interview with Vitaly Klitschko, the renowned mayor of Kyiv, 2 years on from the Russian invasion. Have a listen.
The biggest mistake to think the war far away, it doesn't touch me personally. It's the biggest mistake, this war can touch everyone. One of the worst case scenarios, the front line right now in Zaporizhzhia, in Energodar, is one of the largest nuclear stations in Europe. Yeah. The nuclear station a couple of months ago was on the fire, because in the front line, if explosion will can be tragedy times bigger than Chernobyl. In this worst case scenario, this war can touch everyone in our planet. And that's why we have to do everything to stop this war.
Then, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, was Lee Anderson's suspension the last straw for you? It's not getting any easier for the Tories, as Lee Anderson was stripped of the Tory whip over his comments on Sadiq Khan, with new polling suggesting right-wing voters in rural areas are turning away from the party in their droves. So what do you think? Are they toast? As ever, email me, gbviews@gbnews.com, or tweet me at gbnews. Right, though, it's now time for this week's Outside, and it's been 2 years since Russia's invasion of Kyiv. And my guest today sat down for a world-exclusive interview with Vitaly Klitschko, the renowned mayor of Kyiv. Now, I'm pleased to say that I'm joined now by filmmaker Andrew Drury. Andrew, thank you very much for joining me. You've also interviewed Shamima Begum. We'll come on to that there.
Oh, not again.
Not again. But you have been doing the rounds talking about it. But, of course, you've been in Kyiv. You were there a couple of weeks ago, as I understand it. Yeah. Talk to me about what you saw and, you know, how did you get the interview?
Just friends, just normal guy. He's very approachable. And for me, it was important because we've all been watching Israel. And I thought, you hardly see anything in the pages of the papers about Ukraine anymore. So I wanted to find what was happening. So I took the journey from Warsaw, a long journey, and a shocking journey. It wasn't dangerous, the journey into there, but I think for me, the striking thing was driving past graveyards full of the blue and yellow flags, and the amount of death of soldiers. And equally, being in Kyiv, and it looked like a normal, ordinary city like London. You book into your hotel. The first thing that's striking, you've got your air raid shelter, which obviously isn't normal. There was nothing really unusual about it, or it didn't seem it. It was only when we went to bed at night and the sirens go off, and you wake up to the news in the morning, another 40 or 50 dead.
Oh, God.
So the real, and I think 120 to 250 people die on the front line every day.
So what are we seeing here on our screens? Because we've got rockets and things. These are from your footage?
No, but there'll be the targets of the major cities. I think that's the Russian stuff that's targeting main cities of Ukraine.
Yeah, it's frightening, isn't it?
It is.
Well, listen, shall we play part of your interview with Vitaly Klitschko?
Please, thank you.
Let's have a listen to, this is Andrew Drury speaking to Vitaly Klitschko in Kyiv.
We never believe starting war in Ukraine. Ukraine always was peaceful country where lived more than 70 nations, and we was never ever aggressive to anyone. And as goodwill, we give up our nuclear weapons as a neutral country, and war in our homeland in the last second, the last minute. We don't want to believe in that, but it happens. It was shocked. The first days, I guess, everyone was in shock. And but I have a couple of stories when I tell I'm proud to be Ukrainian. The points where you can be part of territorial defense, the line, I guess, couple of miles. People stay day and night, night and day to fill an application, to receive the uniform, to take the weapons, and they decide to defend the city. 3 guys asking me, first of all I asked who you are. One of them was musician, another was actor, third one was doctor. Very peaceful profession. They asked me not to help them. They told in any second Russian tanks coming to our checkpoints. And we doesn't have heavy weapons. They not asked to move from that to save his lives. They ready to fight and ready to die. I never forget the body smell. The whole street of the body. Civilians. It's not special operation, it's not the war. By the way, war have rules, never touch civilians, women, children, old people. The butcher shocked the whole world. It's not the war, it's terrorism.
We're looking likely to have Keir Starmer as our next Prime Minister. I know Boris Johnson's very friendly here. Do you have an opinion on Keir Starmer? Do you know much about him?
I'm sorry, I'm not ready to give you a clear answer, but anyway, we expect from any politician around the world after the election, support of Ukraine is critically important. Ukraine is largest European country, and stability in largest country in Europe depend whole stability in Europe, not just in Europe, around the world.
Wow, so that was you speaking to Vitaly Klitschko. He said the butcher. Was he referring to Putin?
No, sorry. Bucha's an area, sorry.
Oh, Bucha.
Bucha is his pronunciation. Bucha is the area where they found the mass graves.
Yeah.
I visited there, and I think that's probably the most shocking place I've ever been in my life, and I've been to most front lines. Obviously, it wasn't active. We worked there as a church, and they have kind of a monument to the people who were killed there. And I was with a driver, and I didn't really notice him because we're going about our things, and all of a sudden, the driver grabbed hold of me and he was in floods of tears because that's how much the impact it had on them. It's a horrendous place, and we went and interviewed some people that witnessed the genocide that was carried out there. So any legitimacy of the war, I mean, this is not, these are animals, whatever. I mean, rape, murder, just horrendous.
And I suppose it's because they can. Who's going to protect the people? It's almost lawlessness, I should imagine.
It's shocking. I mean, Vitaly said to me, he doesn't know what the war's about. Nobody does. He just thinks that Putin wants land and he wants genocide. He wants to wipe off all the Ukrainian people. That's their view.
So how are the people of Ukraine faring with this? Because, as you said, it feels like they're just moving around normally, but then the next day you hear people have just died.
They take it as just normal everyday occurrence. The air raids at night, no one goes to the shelters. Everybody just carries on. The markets are open. I mean, when I was there, I went and witnessed one of the attacks, and market shops were open around it. After the explosion only happened 10 minutes ago, people just continuing as normal, because it is normal to them now. I think they're frustrated that the world's media are staying away from there, don't really care anymore. That's what they feel. They haven't got enough weapons. They're not getting enough stuff from us or help from us. Because we know what happened when we saw Ukrainians flooding over the border. There was mass help. That's gone now. The borders are empty. So it's complete change. And I wanted to bring it, and thankfully to you, although Vitaly's watching this.
He's watching
He's actually watching GB News at this minute.
Yeah.
So we'll be glad the message is going over.
Yeah.
And I thank you for that.
Yeah, well, listen, so good of him to talk to you. Vitaly, thank you so much. We really appreciate you actually giving us your time to tell us about what's going on. So, Andrew, how did you get there? Did you just fly? Are there still flights just going straight?
No, you can't fly in, obviously. There's no fly zone. I went in from Warsaw.
Oh, okay.
We just went overnight. It was a long day. I think it was about 12, 13 hours from Warsaw on the road. Just normal road, normal motorway. There wasn't anything really to see apart the striking graveyards. I mean, they will stay with me. I've never seen so many new graves in my life.
Well, listen, you've been busy. You've been talking about Shamima Begum.
Yeah, of course.
So let's do a brief one on her then. I said that we shouldn't really be funding any more legal aid because she's no longer a citizen of this country.
Yeah.
What's your view on it all? Because, you know, there's been a lot of sympathisers towards her. And it's rightly so, everyone has their own opinion. But what was your actual opinion of her?
As a person, she's hideous. From the beginning when I met her, the sympathy I had, and over the 2 years I spent with her, she's not the person everybody thinks. They think she's some sort of vulnerable young girl. The only reason she wants to be back here is she doesn't like her surroundings. It's a hot camp, it gets cold in the winter, and she just doesn't, she just wants to come home because it's nice and safe here now. Too bad luck. You've done what you've done. And I'm surprised that people keep bringing this 15 thing into it. You know, saying she's a victim because she was 15. You know different 15-year-olds, Nana. You can be 15 and 15, and she was more like, well, a lot older 15 than you. I mean, she planned it. You know, she was the biggest instigator of going out of those 3 girls.
But people could say that she's been, used. So somebody, especially somebody who's older, who has more nous of the world, could come up and tell her all sorts of things and, use all sort of manipulating tactics to get her to do that. And people could argue that that's what happened.
I think it's a load of nonsense. I think that even if that be the case, she still went on her own free will. It's like I hear this radicalisation, I hear this, that she was, taken over by some old men or anything. She didn't, she planned it, she got what she wanted. She went over there, she got married, somebody she fell in love with. I hear that he now mentally abused her. But that's not what she said to me. For a year, she told me how much she loved him and she'd like to go back with him.
But she might have been saying that to you, as some women do, to sort of make everything sound rosy.
No, nonsense. That's exactly what she did. She loved him. And now it doesn't help her by saying she loved the guy. No, that's nonsense, not at all. She's where she should be. Let's keep her there.
Yeah, keep her there. And finally, to Ukraine, what do you think Ukraine needs then? You've seen it firsthand.
Vitaly.
You talked about Vitaly.
Yeah.
What would he want the world to be doing for Ukraine?
Vitaly, as he said, they're losing soldiers, which is the biggest fear. There's not enough men. They need weapons. They're not getting the weapons like they used to. And they're saying it's slowed up and slowed up and slowed up. And without those weapons, they can't fight. The Russians will be in. I think they are that close. The fight is hard. It's hard. They've just come through a winter. As I say, they're losing about 250 people a day. I mean, you think about that in numbers of soldiers. It's unbelievable.
Well, what about on the Russian side? They must be losing a lot of people as well.
Yeah, we don't hear any reports about that. Obviously, so nothing comes back. I would imagine they're losing more. It should just end.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's going on. I don't think anybody does.
2 years.
2 years.
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
But I've got a good friend in Vitaly. Although the interview looked like it was sombre, we had some good fun too. We spoke about the Usyk fight. He spoke about his boxing. He believes Usyk will beat Tyson Fury. He says he needs to go on a diet. Tyson. So, Tyson, if you listen to this, you need to get yourself on a diet.
Well, and that's on Vitaly, so take it seriously. So if people want to find out, have you put this anywhere on YouTube or somewhere like that, the full interview? Will it be somewhere for people to watch?
Yeah, it'll be released on YouTube, and I hope everybody does watch it, because I think he says some important things.
All right, where will they find it on YouTube?
We haven't released it yet, but search my name, you'll definitely find it. One thing I want to say to you about our mayor and his mayor. Our mayor puts ULIS cameras up in every corner. He has to have guns. Yeah. There's the difference in job.
Well, Andrew Drury, thank you so much. Really good to talk to you. That is Andrew Drury, filmmaker and journalist. He interviewed Vitaly Klitschko. That is an exclusive to GB News. We thank him for that. But stay tuned, it's just coming up to 19 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. Next up, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, was Lee Anderson's suspension the last straw for you?
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially, just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm just going to read a little message from Stu. Stu says, hi, Nana, I enjoy both the GB News and Top TV. And he said, obviously, I can't glue myself to the TV all day, but I have to be selective. And the three I don't miss are you, I'm at the top, somebody else, and then Andrew Pearce. Thank you very much, Stu. That's really nice of you. Thank you. Right, 23 minutes after 5 o'clock, it's fast approaching. We are GB News, we're the People's Channel. It's time now for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, was Lee Anderson's suspension the last straw for you? It's not getting any easier for the Tories, as Lee Anderson was stripped of the Tory whip over his comments on Sadiq Khan. And with new polling suggesting that right-wing voters in rural areas are turning away from the party in their droves, the Tory vote appears to be collapsing among its rural voters. So what do you think? Since the 2019 election signals a significant shift in allegiance, with only 27% now supporting them compared to 69% previously. What is your view? This also comes as Reform UK threatens to fracture the Conservative coalition further, favouring Farage over Tories. So is Sunak right to suspend him? And well, do you think that perhaps this is the last straw for you? So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is Lee Anderson's suspension the last straw? Joining me now to discuss, Dennis McShane, former Labour Minister for Europe, Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of the Conservative Home, and also Andrew Drury. He stays to join me. He's a filmmaker and a journalist. Well, I'm going to start with you, Henry Hill. What are your thoughts?
I mean, to the headline question, no, I don't think it's the last straw, because the suspension is a perfectly is the right thing to do. There are all sorts of criticism that you can level at Sadiq Khan as a Conservative about the way he's run London, about the way that he and the Metropolitan Police have lost control of the Palestine protests. All of those are legitimate criticisms. But what Lee Anderson did was slander. He alleged that the Mayor of London was under the control of Islamic extremists. Now, if he has evidence to back that claim up, he hasn't presented it. And if he hasn't, then it is slander. I'm astonished that he didn't apologise.
So what's the difference in your view with Sadiq Khan, for example, saying that people who voted ULEZ are under control of the far right, and what Lee Anderson said? Because that's Sadiq Khan claiming that those who voted against ULEZ are far right. So what's, in your view, is there much difference in that?
Well, that's also a stupid slander by Sadiq Khan.
But he got away with it, though.
Well, in which case that's an injustice. But the thing is, he is an independently elected. He's the independently elected mayor of London, and so he is eventually answerable to the electorate. In the same way that the Conservative Party can't sack Lee Anderson as an MP, they can withdraw the whip, but his mandate comes from the people of Ashfield, and it will be for them to decide whether or not to return him as MP if they get the opportunity at the next election. I'm not so yes. What Sadiq Khan said was also stupid and wrong, but that doesn't mean that what Lee Anderson said was okay. And if you want to be able to if you want to create the space for making the many legitimate criticisms that you can make of the Mayor of London, the last thing you want to do is be associating that legitimate criticism with the kind of things that Lee Anderson said. So I'm sorry, especially given that he didn't apologise. He should have either put up or shut up. When he didn't apologise, the Conservative Party had no option to withdraw the whip, and it was the right decision.
Dennis McShane.
I note, first of all, that the Conservative candidate for Mayor of London, Sarah Hall, so I don't even know her name, this is awful.
Suzanne Hall.
Suzanne Hall, excuse me. She's staying well out of this because she knows that to pile in on Lee Anderson's side would just lose her all of London, not she's going to lose anyway. And I also noticed that Robin Jenrick, who's been constantly on the television today, said, when asked about it, said, I'm not commenting on that. We took the right decision. So will he come back? Well, he didn't apologise, so we're firing him for not apologising. We're not firing him for one of the senior figures in the Conservative Party making the most racist, anti-Muslim comment that I've heard in 50 years of politics. So I think the Tories actually are going to have a lot more lost straws. They don't know how to handle this.
But Dennis, Islam isn't a race, is it? I mean, neither is Judaism. They are belief systems. Usually, Islam is usually in theocratic regimes, so it's not racist, is it? I mean, if you want to call it Islamophobic, that's fair enough. But
that's what I do. I'm sorry. I dislike the term Islamophobia because I remember the Pope tried to get into the European Treaty 20 years ago, which I helped negotiate, the idea that it would be Catholic phobia to criticise the Catholic Church. I mean, the French and everybody else and Jack Straw, we just laughed it out of court. No, but when he actually says that Khan is in the control and represents what is a criminal conspiracy, I mean, I can be very boring about Islamists, Nana. It was defamation, but, top politicians don't sue each other for defamation. And Rishi, Mr Sunak, didn't stamp on it. He said...
Well, it was interesting that his great leader, Keir Starmer, stood for Sadiq Khan, calling people far right. Andrew Drury.
Well, for me, I am probably the rural right. For me, it's the last straw. I think you take away his voice, and I think what Lee Anderson was saying was a lot of people's fear. And I don't think he should have to apologise, in my view. So I think... And I don't think there's anything for him to apologise about.
Well, I mean, if I say now on this programme that the Jews control whoever you like, I will be booted out of the studio, Nana, in 20 seconds.
But what evidence would you have? Look, Lee, I mean, let's imagine. OK, Lee even accepts that the wording was clumsy, but if you look at the evidence, why did Sadiq Khan not respond to a projection on Big Ben? I mean, that's illegal. We know you're not supposed to be doing that. What about the pro-Palestinian protests? Week in, week out, they're chanting from the river to the sea, which many Jewish people are very heavily offended by and is anti-Semitic. And then you had and other situations which, MPs are now also frightened because the Speaker of the House sort of changed parliamentary procedure because of fear.
You're asking me? Well, there's a lot of roll-ups there.
Well, that's three things,
Firstly, from river to the sea, that is in the first paragraph of the Likud Charter. Likud is the most right-wing party. It's been taken over by pro-Palestinians. I don't understand it. It was always a Zionist slogan.
OK. It doesn't matter who's taken over it. The Jewish people find it offensive.
I've thought about that quite a lot, and I've been to observe some of these demonstrations. I live in one of the areas where it's marching. Very simply, I see a lot of pained, middle-class British citizens of Muslim faith, angry and upset as I am, as a strong supporter of Israel, that 30,000 women, children, babies, old men have been killed in some kind of
But it's war.
response by
Look,
Israel.
Dennis, look,
It's not
nobody,
war.
nobody wants to see death and destruction, but it is war, and let's not forget that they still have the hostages, they're not giving them back, and that Hamas have been firing rockets throughout this period and even before. Final word to you, Henry Hill.
Well, I think you touched on the protests. The protests are exactly the kind of thing that you can criticise the Mayor of London for, because we have seen the Metropolitan Police moving on peaceful counter-protesters rather than protecting their right to protest when they've been threatened. We have seen anti-Semitic slogans. We have seen religious extremists. By no means all the protesters, but those elements have been there. And those efforts to criticise him for all of those things are undermined if you make baseless slanders.
Final word for you, Andrew Drury.
I think the protests, for me, seeing the protests have all been one-sided. I only ever see the Palestinian flags when driving through London, and it seems that's kind of what's been thrown down our throats all the time. I don't think there's an equal argument for both. I really don't. And I think people have got that Islamic fear. I spend most of my time in Islamic countries, and there is a fear within the country, and it has to be addressed, and there has to be a voice.
Do you see Russian flags in Kyiv?
Yes, I do. No, I don't, of course, obviously, no Ukrainian. So what's your point? What is your point about that? What's the point about
very
that?
simply...
I don't understand the point, though.
The point is no one in Kiev is going to be out there supporting Russia, despite many people, including...
Let me tell you about those... Let me tell you about those...
10 seconds and I've got to...
Let me tell you about those Palestinians. If you stop one of them, which I have, and asked them where Gaza is, none of them can tell you where it is. Not one person.
That's a lot of these marches are full of some very ignorant people, but I suspect they might say that they're protesting because of the deaths and destruction. But listen, thank you so much to Dennis McShane, former Labour Minister for Europe, Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of The Conservative Home, and Andrew Drury, filmmaker and journalist. Well, it's coming up to 32 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. Still to come, we'll continue with the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, was Lee Anderson's suspension the last straw for you? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, but first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you and good afternoon. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Labour's demanding assurances that suspended Tory MP Lee Anderson won't have the whip returned. Today, the former deputy chair still refused to apologise for saying the London mayor was controlled by Islamists. Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Jonathan Ashworth has written to Rishi Sunak to confirm he won't be allowed back into the party. Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden says it was right to remove the whip from Mr Anderson.
I don't believe that Lee Anderson is an Islamophobe, but words matter, and the choice of words that he used, the choice of words that he used was not appropriate. He was given the opportunity to apologise, didn't take that opportunity, and therefore the Chief Whip took the decision to remove the whip from him.
The SNP says it will take up the Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle's offer of a meaningful debate on a new Gaza ceasefire motion. There was uproar after he allowed MPs to vote on a Labour amendment on Wednesday, leading to calls for his resignation. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn says his party will now push Parliament to support what he describes as concrete actions. Migrants have been intercepted trying to cross the Channel for the first time in a week. More than 230 people were found on 5 small boats and were later taken to the Border Force Processing Centre in Dover. Sources suggest as many as 12 boats could attempt the dangerous crossing today to take advantage of the brief window of better weather. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Lots of people very concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. Iran obviously denying it, but the next move from the United States, our key allies, will be absolutely key.
Absolutely right. And I think there's a lot of talk about where this could go, whether the situation could be escalated. But I think the chatter is heading in the right direction, which is about de-escalation. So if there are going to be targeted sanctions against Iran, that's already happened through expelling certain diplomats and other measures there. But you can do that without arm-to-arm combat at this stage. But I think the US will be weighing up all of its options. Antony Blinken obviously gave a press conference in the United States yesterday to say that, there will be a response from the US, but it'll be at their time and it'll be in the way in which they think is the most appropriate. So all eyes are now on the United States as to when it makes that move.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it, how domestic politics plays so much into international politics. The States, they've got a presidential election this year. We've got a budget coming up. So all the noise, both sides. You've got Donald Trump saying, go a bit more hawkish, I suppose you could say, than President Biden. And here we've got all the generals. We've got the Secretary of State for Defence coming out saying, we need conscription, we need more cash. But a lot of that is part of the sort of national narratives rather than actually looking at what's happening in Iran, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it plays into, the very uncertain times that we're living. And you're absolutely right. There'll be supporters of Donald Trump who are clearly adversaries of Joe Biden to say we must act now. It's a demonstration of showing your strength. Opponents of Biden will say that the US looks weak if it doesn't take action now against Iran, who are clearly, as we know, funding these at arm's length organisations like Hezbollah in Tehran, like the Houthis who are carrying out the attacks in the Red Sea. So Iran is responsible.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, 37 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Don't forget as well, you can stream the shows live on YouTube or download the GB News app for free. I'm Nana Akua and it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, was Lee Anderson's suspension the last straw for you? Now, with Lee Anderson losing the Tory whip over his remarks about Sadiq Khan and recent polling, which indicates a decline in support among right-wing voters, especially in rural areas, the Conservative Party is facing a mountain of challenges. The collapse in the Tory vote share among the rural right since 2019 election has plummeted from 69% to just 27%. This underscores a significant shift in allegiance that the party cannot afford to ignore. So adding fuel to the fire, Reform UK, under the leadership of Nigel Farage, poses a formidable threat to the Conservative coalition, with Farage gaining traction among rural voters. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, was Lee Anderson's suspension the last straw for you? Well, joining me now, my panel, broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly, and also columnist of The Independent. See, your title's changed again, Donica McCarthy. Right, and let's start with you, Danny Kelly.
It's interesting, the plummet in the support for the Conservatives in rural areas. Now, I don't know whether that's to do with the performance of this current government or whether there are consequences of Brexit, for example, because I've been watching the news and there's lots of disquiet and unhappiness with Brexit. So I'm not sure whether it's right to just lump it all together. But let's just say it is. Then it's just general disappointment and disillusionment with the Conservative government. I think when Lee Anderson said what he said, I don't buy into the fact that was racist. I don't think it was. I think what he was saying... I know, Donica, you were nodding there, or...
No, I agree with you.
You agree with me? Oh, good man. Thank you. I don't think it's racist at all.
Religious bigotry, but not racism.
OK, well, OK, so semantics aside, I don't think that was racist. I don't think really it was religious bigotry, and we could disagree about that. Is it the end of the Conservatives, or further decline because of what he said, then I think it probably is. I think that, you know, it's just that just another like building block of just complete disillusionment for so many Conservative voters. And Reform will be the benefactors of this. Reform will pick up Lee Anderson, and whether you like Reform or you don't like Reform, Reform's, you know, modus operandi and raison d'etre is just to demolish and just get rid of the Tories completely. It's a long-term game, not this election, not the election after that, but maybe the election.
How do you know if everyone just has enough of the Tories and loads of people are sick of the Labour Party as well, especially with all these weird things going on with regard to voting and things like that in the Houses of Parliament, and Keir Starmer potentially influencing Sir Lindsay Hoyle to change procedures and everything. I think a lot of people are seeing the protests week in, week out. They're probably getting sick of the split between the Labour Party, who have probably lost the Jewish vote, and the Muslim vote seems not far behind. Donica, what do you think?
Well, I mean, the majority of the British people support the aims of those peace marches, so I don't think that's going to move the rural vote. Well, what's happening to the rural vote is quite interesting. The latest polling shows Labour is leading, Tories are way behind, and it looks like the Tories will lose their heartland seats to a pincer movement. Yellow seats going to Liberal Democrats.
No, they're not going anywhere.
They are in rural seats. In rural seats, they won the by-elections in Somerset. I'm a former. I'm not a member of any party. I'm a floating voter. I'm not a fan of Keir Starmer, but the polls are saying that in rural areas, the Tories are going to lose seats two ways. One to the Liberal Democrats and the other to Tories, to Labour. Because, Reform rising in those votes will split the right-wing vote and allow both the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party to win.
But would you not say that it is actually a more... you call it a right-wing vote. I'm not so sure, because I think that what has happened is the Labour Party and the Tory Party have become socialist parties, which is something that Richard Tice alluded to, because that's what I'm seeing. High taxes have never been higher, and lots of state control. That seems to be what the Tory Party are all about. I'm not seeing any Tory policies coming out from Tory HQ. And I think what's happening, you'll find that a lot of Labour voters might also shift to Reform, because I don't think the Labour Party represent their heartland of voters, because they're more working class, more hard-working...
That's really interesting.
Kind of a more Lee Anderson type character.
It's not showing in the polls at the moment that Labour votes are moving to Reform. It is showing Labour are soaring in the polls at the moment. But Danny's point valid was about rural voters. What's happened in rural areas is they're hammered by the new trade treaties that are being agreed by the Tories in the Far East and in Australia and New Zealand, bringing in cheap imports.
Donica, when I say...
sorry.
You should close your mouth.
Donica,
I've kissed at Blarney Stone 6 times, for goodness sake.
Donica, you claimed earlier on that the majority of the public, the British public, are behind these pro-Palestine marches and anti-Israel and the conflict marches.
Not anti-Israel, but they want...
Anti-Israel and the conflict, I said. I'm talking about the government of Israel, not the country. I'm not talking about Zionism. Although I think there's a blurred line between some of the protesters and what they're trying to achieve and Zionism. But just that aside for a second, where do you get your statistic that most of the country are behind the Palestinian protests?
Well, there was a vote taken when the Parliament voted on the ceasefire. Was it?
So you're talking about MPs. I'm talking about the public.
No,
you said most of the country.
Yeah.
You're talking about representation.
Yeah. So when Parliament voted on the ceasefire, was it 2 months ago? 71% of MPs voted against the ceasefire, and let me finish. 79% of the polling in the public said they favoured the ceasefire. 79%.
All right, OK, enough from you, Donica.
No, that's different. That's different to what they're protesting about.
They're calling for a ceasefire.
Be quiet. Let it finish. What are you talking about?
No. So 79% of the public want a ceasefire.
Yeah, absolutely.
OK, but the protesters, not all of them are after a ceasefire. A lot of them, I would say, an unhealthy minority want to see the eradication of Israel.
Right. OK, well, listen, this show's nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voices, their opportunity to be on the show and tell us what they think about the topics we're discussing. I've got two of you. Slim pickings. Right, I'm going to start with you then. Alan McNeely. He's there in Grimsby. Alan, what do you think? Is this the last straw for you, seeing Lee Anderson suspended for what a lot of people may well be thinking?
Good afternoon. I think Lee Anderson is perfectly entitled to say whatever he believes to be true. I don't see that anyone's been particularly offended. I watched the clip just a short time ago, and I couldn't see anything that would be either racist or particularly bad about it. Yes, somebody's got offended. Everybody's got the right to be offended, but everybody's got the right to say what they believe to be true.
All right, Brian Dugan.
Yeah, I don't think it's a case, Nana, of
everyone having the right to free speech. We said this yesterday. Of course, everyone does have the right to that. But you don't have the right to be indulging in outright fear-mongering and classic dog whistling. And what he said was unquestionably Islamophobic. As we said yesterday, no, it's not racism, but it is Islamophobic. And this fear that the likes of Lee Anderson is attempting to spread, along with Suella Braverman and others, is very dangerous for our society at large, the country as a whole. We should be uniting around issues whereby, as Donaghy has pointed out, despite Danny trying to knock him down, 79% of the people of this country would prefer to see a ceasefire in the conflict in Gaza. And that's what it's about. It's about people not killing one another. That's what the majority want.
Most people want to see an end to the conflict. That's really,
Absolutely, Nana.
I don't think,
absolutely.
Even the poll that says 79%, I'm hoping that it also said a release of the hostages immediately, which I would expect.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
And, that would be the end of the war, frankly. So what do you think, then? So for you, Alan McNeely, do you think that seeing Lee Anderson suspended was the last straw and would influence your vote? Yes or no? Briefly.
It won't make any difference to how I vote.
Okay, and same to Brian Dugan. Not Brian, yeah, Brian, same to you. Makes no difference.
Yeah, I think it'll be one of the last straws for the Tory party, and they'll be voted out for sure.
Yeah. All right, listen, thank you so much for your thoughts. That's Alan McNeely and also Brian Dugan from Solihull. My voice is... What is it, Danny?
May I just address what that lad said? OK, Donaghy said that 79% of the population agree with the protests. My argument...
No, I said this... Let him finish. Stop. Be quiet.
OK.
Be quiet. Let him finish.
But we're talking about the protests as well. My point is that an unhealthy majority, or minority, hopefully, of those protesters want to see the eradication of Israel. From the rivers to the sea, whatever that song is. OK, which... Have you sung that song?
And my point is, Likud, the Jewish, the Zionist state said they want from the river to the sea. So there's terrorism on both sides.
Have you sung that song?
You're doing the Likud thing.
Have you sung that song?
Listen, that song, whoever made it up, right now, it's being used as an anti-Semitic chant. That's what we want to hear.
Have you sung it? Have you sung it?
I don't know the song.
He's now correcting me, telling me it's anti-Zionist, honestly. Listen, this is GB News on GB Views, gbnews.com. I'm Nana Akua. I think it's time for a break now, isn't it? We're back in a moment.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Mike Freer joins me now. Mike, thank you very much for coming into the studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
Firstly, how are you?
It's been a busy day, and it's been quite a traumatic experience. It's a real wrench to walk away from a job that you love, but also a constituency that you've become... I live there, it's my home, and I regard many of my constituents as friends, and it is an amazing place, and to walk away from that is really quite... it's quite an emotional wrench to think this was a job I loved, but unfortunately I can't do it anymore.
Can you talk me through the process? Because you mentioned about the alleged arson attack, etc., being the final straw, but this has been a really quite vile journey to get to this point. So what kind of threats have you had? What's that look like?
Well, like every MP, I mean, you day in, day out, you get abusive emails, you get low-level stuff that, whether we should accept it, but we do, it's graffiti, it's things like, I've had, in the past, I've had a mock Molotov cocktail left on the office door, meaning we had to evacuate the whole building. I've come out of my house and found a note on my car. Where I live is common knowledge, but what I drive is less so. And it's a few weeks after John Mann had the wheel nuts on his car tampered with. So that all kind of makes you get a bit, what on earth's going on. But I've had 2 run-ins with the organisation that was Muslims Against Crusades, and people like Anjem Chowdhury, who was behind that organisation, been to prison. But online it said, I used to do surgery in mosques, surgery mosques. So I wanted to go out and see people. And online, there's a picture of me saying, "You're not welcome in our mosque. Let Stephen Timms be a pointed reminder." So it's not very subtle.
Well, just for our viewers and listeners who might not remember that,
Stephen Timms, of course, was stabbed by a woman who'd been radicalised. Thank heavens he survived. So it was a very unsubtle.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. And it's time now for Supplement Sunday, the part of the show where I pick up some stories that caught my eye. But let's do the debate first. BBC Director General Tim Davie has told his staff that they should be proud to be progressive. In a leaked recording, he made the remarks during an online question and answer session, with employees saying the BBC's coverage is fair and balanced. Sorry, technically in terms of impartiality. Oh, what? In his defence, a BBC spokesman said the Director-General meant progressive in relation to areas like market-led technological change, and that any other interpretation is wrong. Right, so for the mini debate, I'm asking, is the BBC proud and progressive? Is it progressive, Danny Kelly?
Well, it is progressive, and I'm a victim of its progressiveness. I was talking to Donica during one of the breaks. Being progressive means that it's no longer a meritocracy, in my opinion. So you're levelling up, and whenever you level up and you just tick boxes for diversity's sake, then in my opinion it no longer becomes a meritocracy.
And is it impartial?
No, in my experience, it's not.
And Donica, you've got about 20 seconds.
It's not progressive enough, is my problem with it. How often do you see Green voices, Lib Dem voices on BBC?
They're always there.
I listen to the world. I listen to the World at One every day, usually for my news, and it's always a Tory debating a Tory. And if you look at that top of the BBC...
That can't be true.
No, it is true.
That's not what Tim Davie was talking about.
Tories.
Tim Davie wasn't talking about politics and balance.
But if you look at the top of the BBC, they've been appointed Tories for decades.
Yeah, well, they might have appointed Tories, but you can't really say that they're not really Conservatives in a sense, but neither are the Tory party. Right, let's see. It's time now for Supplement Sunday, where my panel and I discuss some of the news stories that caught their eye. I'm going to start with... you, Danny, you haven't got... OK, I'm going to start with you, Donica, your story.
OK. What I suggested we should talk about is a really geeky subject called the Energy Charter Treaty. And what's the good news is that Britain has come out of it. And I would have thought, from many of the viewers of GB News who were pro-Brexit, this is good news. Because what it means is Britain's taking back sovereignty, that it gave way to this crazy treaty that allowed oil billionaires to sue Britain if we did a net zero action to reduce costs and clean up our energy. Across Europe, oil companies are suing governments if they take action to protect their society. So, for example, Italy. Italy wanted to protect its beaches. It brought in a ban on drilling oil off its coast for 10 miles, and an oil company sued them for $210 million. Outrageous. OK. So really good news.
My Sunday supplement is slightly more interesting than Donica's. Donald Trump threatens to deport Prince Harry by warning, "I won't protect you like Biden." Donald Trump has told Daily Express US that the royal family has been too gracious to Harry and that he would not protect him like Joe Biden has done in the US. Does this mean that he's going to be deported? Personally, I hope not. I've got nothing against the lad. But anyway, just shows how much Donald Trump really likes the royal family.
Isn't it?
Doesn't it?
Yeah, and Donica, what do you think on this?
Well, I just think, talking about Trump, and we had the interview with Klitschko earlier, I think the real tragedy of Trump blocking American aid to Klitschko and Ukraine is a big tragedy. We should be talking about.
But he's not the one that's blocking it. It's Joe Biden, isn't it?
No. It's actually Biden wants to give $60 billion aid to Ukraine and to Israel.
Trump's questioning whether it should continue. Trump
instructed the Republican House of Representatives to block the aid. The Republicans in the Senate have said yes, but the Republicans in the House of Representatives are saying no. And I wish Trump would lift that veto on this crucial aid for Klitschko and Ukraine.
Well, we'll find out more about that. But my supplement is this wonderful book that Donica handed me, the The prostitute state. That's what it's called. Donica, by Donica McCarthy.
Yeah, I thought Nana, you needed some wokeness in your life. So I thought you'd bring a book full of wokeness. It's about how British politics got corrupted. It's how democracy has been bought, and I think you'll enjoy reading it.
Right, OK.
If I'd have known that I was allowed to shamelessly plug my book, I'd have brought it in. It's a cookbook that was written about 20 years ago when I was at the BBC.
It's obviously really...
I'll shamelessly bring it in and plug it.
Everything in it. Right. Yeah, as ever. But on today's show, I've been asking, has our politics been captured by the fear of Islamism? And according to our Twitter poll, 92.5% of you say yes, 77.5% of you say no. Well, I've got to say a huge thank you to my panel, broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Thank you very much, Danny. And also columnist and at The Independent, Donica McCarthy. Thank you very much, Donica. You've been fab.
Very much.
And as ever, a huge thank you to you at home for your company. I'll see you next week, same time, same place at 3. I'll leave you with the weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. February is continuing on its reasonably unsettled picture, and it has been a very wet end to the weekend for many southern areas of England. We've got this band of rain continuing to sweep its way eastwards, particularly for southeastern England overnight and into the early hours of tomorrow morning. Some very persistent rainfall could provide some disruption and localised flooding in places, so do continue to take care. Further north, there will be some clear spells overnight, some showers falling on frozen surfaces where we see patchy frost developing across parts of Scotland, so we might see some icy stretches first thing on Monday morning. Otherwise, there will be some sunny intervals for many of us, but this rain in the far southeast will just take a little bit of time to eventually clear its way off. Quite a brisk northeasterly breeze coming in off the North Sea, and it is going to make it feel quite cold and crisp. Some showers just filtering in on that for northeastern England and eastern Scotland as well. Temperatures will be around where we'd expect them to be for the time of year, but as I said, that cold breeze could certainly make it feel a little bit bitter. Into Tuesday, this ridge of high pressure that has brought us to fine conditions on Monday will slowly slip its way southwards, allowing this cold front to then move its way in from the northwest, so increasingly turning wet and windy for Scotland and Northern Ireland first thing. We'll watch as that front slowly pushes its way southeastwards during the day. It will tend to fizzle out, turning lighter and patchier, so certainly the far southeast will stay dry throughout a good portion of the day. We continue to see, though, further bands of rain and showers moving their way in throughout the second half of the week, but enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
You have a president in President Biden who's not enforcing the law that was passed by Congress. President Obama, criticize him or not, actually enforced the law and was deporting people that had crossed illegally. Of course, President Trump enforced the law and improved the law to make sure that and worked with Mexico to have the Remain in Mexico policy. Biden has abandoned federal policy. In fact, he's deliberately trying to let in as many immigrants as possible. More for the Democrats, more is better and less is racist.
Just astonishing. And the statement that Greg Abbott put out is really feisty stuff. He said the federal government has broken the contract between the United States and the state of Texas. And the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states in the United States. Astonishing numbers.
And Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, you know, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be Relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Labour's demanding assurances that suspended Tory MP Lee Anderson won't have the whip returned. The former deputy chair is still refusing to apologise for saying the London mayor was controlled by Islamists. Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Jonathan Ashworth has now written to the Prime Minister to confirm he won't be allowed back into the party. Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden says he does not believe Mr Anderson is an Islamophobe. He told Camilla Tominey, while it was right to remove the whip, he couldn't say whether it would be returned.
Is he going to be allowed back into the Conservative Party if he shows more contrition?
Well, that's a matter for the chief whip, but we set out the reasons why the whip was drawn was that failure to apologise. That's a matter for Lee Anderson.
You can't rule out him having the whip returned. He may have the whip returned, will he, if he apologises?
No, I certainly wouldn't rule that out, but that's a matter for the chief whip.
Another debate on Gaza will be held in the Commons after the chaotic vote on Wednesday. The SNP says it will take up the Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle's offer of a meaningful debate on a new ceasefire motion. There was uproar after he allowed MPs to vote on a Labour amendment, leading to calls for his resignation. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn says his party will seek to move the debate forward that will push Parliament to support what he describes as concrete actions. Migrants have been intercepted trying to cross the Channel for the first time in a week. 290 people were found on 6 small boats today and were taken to the Border Force Processing Centre in Dover. The latest arrivals mean more than 2,000 migrants have crossed the Channel so far this year. A local action group has won its fight over plans to house asylum seekers in Cumbria. Despite a severe housing shortage in the Millom area, 8 properties were earmarked for 40 migrants. It sparked backlash in the community, with police forced to increase patrols after one house was vandalised. In a letter seen by GB News, the Home Office has now ruled the site is not fit for asylum seekers. Dean Myers from Millom Communication Action Group told us it's a huge relief.
The community's just been totally confused. We didn't know who was actually coming into the HMOs. No one consulted us, and it just sparked a bit of anger, I think.
And finally, long-serving Conservative MP Lord Cormack has died at the age of 84. He served as an MP from 1970 to 2010 and was elected 10 times, most recently for the constituency of South Staffordshire. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, described him as a vivid character who was unfailingly kind. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. It's been another very busy week in Westminster. The Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, faced calls to resign following his unprecedented intervention in the Commons on Wednesday. Has he saved his skin for the moment? I'll be asking Deputy PM Oliver Dowden for his thoughts on this. And in the wake of Lee Anderson's suspension yesterday, are the Tories losing their MPs as well as their way? I'll be grilling Red Len McCluskey in a GB News exclusive, the former head of the Unite Union and close comrade of Jeremy Corbyn. With great divides on the left as well as the right emerging over the Gaza ceasefire vote, is the culture of intimidation once again gaining momentum within the Labour Party? As we mark the 2-year anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war this weekend, I'll be speaking to the former Foreign Secretary Sir Malcolm Rifkind to find out if he still believes Putin will be deposed in the near future. Well, to go through the papers this morning, as ever, I'm delighted to be joined now by Nicholas Owen, former BBC broadcaster and journalist. Nick, lovely to see you.
Good morning to you.
Quite the weekend with everything going on with Lee Anderson. Let's get straight in. Well, let's talk first of all, we're calling it Politicians in Peril. It's the Sunday Telegraph front page. It's also reflected on the front of the Sunday Times. Bodyguards for MPs as extremism threat rises. I mean, this is a sorry state of affairs. We're hearing about 3 female MPs now needing security, even though they're backbenchers. Now, I think none of the papers are naming them for understandable reasons. I think one of them must be Suella Braverman, because she was in this seat a couple of weeks ago revealing to us that she had to retain her bodyguards despite standing down as Home Secretary because of the threat she's faced. But my goodness, aren't we in uncharted territory here?
Yes, we are. I mean, I'm surprised if it's only 3, frankly. Yes. Let's just remind ourselves, obviously, senior members of the Cabinet get security, I mean, full up, armed and everything else. Not all ministers do this. Some quite prominent ones do. I don't think, for example, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, despite the fact all the things he does with our money, he doesn't merit it. But as you say, what a sad situation we're coming down to it when individual MPs start having to... Well, when we say hire bodyguards, if that's the right expression, of course, it'll all be on the taxpayer.
Yes.
Fair enough. Maybe that's the world we live in now.
Yeah.
But if we start with 3 female MPs, remind ourselves that it was, 1 female and 1 male MP who were actually murdered while they were serving. Terrifying situation. And I can't believe that it won't just get worse, frankly. Once you start this, I think it'll be a situation where people will say every MP will need a lot more protection.
Look, I think this Gaza conflict has become so toxic now, the debate becoming so divisive. Obviously, we've seen those scenes outside Parliament with From the River to the Sea being projected onto Big Ben. We saw the surrounding of Tobias Ellwood's house. We saw the surrounding of Wes Streeting's and others' offices. We also had this incident, this sort of shenanigans in Parliament last week with Lindsay Hoyle. What's the coverage saying about the Speaker now, this morning, and his future?
Well, I mean, I remember hearing on Friday evening, I think it was, various political shows and question times and things. Lindsay Hoyle, he's toast, he'll be gone, but he'll have to go by the weekend. Well, he's still in a post at the moment, isn't he? But it's a bit hard to see him, how he can get out of this. It's a real conundrum here, isn't it? What sort of pressure was put on him by Sir Keir Starmer?
Yes.
Do you know, all I have heard from Starmer is, and all of us have heard, is one line saying, "Oh, no question of it," or whatever the phrase he used. I think an awful lot of people are not going to be at all happy with that. Well, what the devil happened in that little office behind the Speaker's chair?
We heard he went in shortly before this moment where Lindsay Hoyle obviously chose the Labour amendment, broke with protocol, broke with his own clerk's advice. We then also heard that the Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, was in the office too. Kate Ferguson in The Sun on Sunday here has got a line suggesting that Labour MPs boasted Sir Keir Starmer was going to, quotes, fix the Speaker.
Fix the Speaker, yeah. Well, of course, this is this a case that, one way or another, what words we use, but it was made clear to Lindsay Hoyle, if he wants to go on being Speaker when the new government comes in, and everybody, particularly the bookmakers, think it's all going to be a Labour government with a huge majority as well. If he wants to continue to be Speaker, he'd better sort of toe the party line, remembering, of course, that he's still a Labour MP, though he not supposed to show any political views, whatever. I mean, that is a terribly difficult, dangerous thing for me, I must say. And I just wish there was a little more. I don't know how it's done, how it can be done. A little more pressure on Sir Keir Starmer. Come out, OK, you know, you're expecting to be the Prime Minister. You've got to be straight on this.
Yes.
What did you say to him?
I mean, he has categorically denied claims that he threatened the Speaker with losing his job should he not choose this Labour amendment.
But what did he say?
What did he say? It's a good question, and I shall be trying to find the answer to it in the course of presenting the show over the coming weeks. Let's talk about the Lee Anderson story. Can Lee be reformed is how we're headlining it. I mean, the Sunday Mirror front page is not pulling any punches. Boot out this bigot, they say. We've got a Sunday Telegraph piece talking about how Nigel Farage has said that he would be quite happy to have Lee Anderson in the reform tent. I mean, what's your view on what he said and the subsequent fallout?
Words do matter, don't they? And how you phrase things is terribly important. But I think what Lee Anderson has touched on is something that rattles around in the back of a lot of people's minds, that we do seem to have now a situation, particularly on the streets of London, which is, you know, our capital, every single weekend now, in particular, these huge mobs coming out with some slogans going around, and it just seems as though the mayor capitulated to them. That's a hard thing to say, isn't it? But there's not much sign of much pushback against some of this stuff.
Although, I mean, to single out the mayor, just to add some balance to this debate, I mean, you could single out the Met, and we know that the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, did. She said while she was in office that she felt that the Met were choosing sides, were playing favourites. Yeah. You know, it's a difficult criticism to make, isn't it? Sadiq Khan is a Muslim. He has got a lot of close friends and allies in the Muslim community. But then he'll be arguing that he's London mayor for people of all religions, cultures and backgrounds. Yes. So is it the specificity of singling out Khan? Because actually Lee Anderson hasn't really strayed far from what Suella Braverman said in the Telegraph last week.
That's absolutely true.
And it is true to say that there are some seemingly extremist elements overtaking some of these marches.
Yes, I'm afraid it does seem that. I mean, I tell you something that gets me a bit. It's this business about this phrase, you know, from the river to the sea. That's a very inflammatory thing, actually, and I think one has got to be very clear about that. What is actually at the moment between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea? It is the State of Israel. So if we are talking about overturning that, that's a very, very dangerous thing indeed, in my view, that phrase is splashed about everywhere. I think it is time, perhaps, for the police or the mayor or whatever to say, let us please stop at least that sort of inflammatory remark being thrown onto Big Ben as a slogan. You know, I think we've got to try to get some rules in place, if you like, and then we can turn around to people like Lee Anderson and say, no, look here, people are being very strict about this. You cannot go ahead accusing the mayor of being in hoc to Islamists in the way that he has suggested. The only way you're going to get round this, I think, is by showing a bit of strength in the other direction. You have got to address the concerns, the very, very clear and completely understandable concerns of people in the Jewish community who actually feel threatened. I've got very, very good Jewish friends who really do feel that this country now is a place where anti-Semitism is on the rise. This is and that we've got to face that. That's a terrible thing.
Although Muslims will say, you know,
with.
the statistics suggest that Islamophobia is also on the rise, and comments like Anderson's don't help that. Just a final thought on Anderson, Nick, is the Tories' loss Reform's gain?
Well, I'm not so sure about that. Interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think what our dear friend and your fellow presenter, Nigel Farage, likes, having people who make waves is terrific, isn't it? But I'm not sure whether Lee Anderson would be very good for Reform or for anybody else. I think Lee, actually, I tell you what, mate, shut up.
Fair play. Let's go to the final story that we've picked out. We've picked it out because of your former guise as a BBC broadcaster. Well, to be fair, this caught your attention.
It did, oh, absolutely.
It's on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph.
Yes.
And I'll give you the headline and you can react to it from Tim Davie. BBC should be proud to be progressive, Director General told staff.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I mean, this is just... What I think about this is when somebody like Tim Davie says this at the very top of the BBC, this is going to go straight to the heart of those who write lots of letters to your newspaper,
Yes.
Camilla, you know, grumpy colonels in their golf clubs. So they're going to say, I told you,
To be fair, they're not all grumpy colonels. You get people of all shapes and sizes criticising the BBC for bias, to be fair.
Of course.
And the BBC, of course, denies that. But Davies basically saying it's fine to be woke. I mean, is it at the BBC?
Well, he didn't quite say that. Actually, I think he said, you know, this is not woke, but we're proud to be progressive.
Well, should they be progressive? Should they taking any sort of stance?
I think, again, why sort of people like in these sort of prominent positions, and Director General is a very, very difficult job, and I think Tim Davie is a great fellow in many ways, but again, you know, choose your words a bit more carefully, please. Why don't people think before they speak, or put it on Twitter, or whatever they're doing with it?
I know, because they're probably rushed into putting it on Twitter. That's half the problem. Nick Owen, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
When you listen to Nigel Farage's assessment there, do you feel that maybe this is as good as it was going to get, given that we had the pandemic and it was inevitably always going to be a bit of a mixed bag?
Well, I think it's a bit of a poor excuse from Nigel there that they haven't done it properly. The facts are, Nigel, that it's not worked. It's not going to work. Yes, we will rejoin. I mean, are we better off for it? Are they...
Can I jump in there, Charlie? We're going to rejoin under which government? Because Labour aren't going to do that, unless you don't think...
But I mean, it's going to be unavoidable not to join, because I think it's getting worse and worse for us. I mean, let me just say this. Are the NHS better because we're out of Europe? No, they're not, because they're not employing more staff. Is the building trade better off? No. Is travelling abroad or to the EU or staying in the EU, are we better off? No. Are we better off because foods rise because of the EU? No. Are we better off with imports and export? No, because they're taking longer. The overall result is that we're not better off. The killer point here is 57% of the public will now vote to remain. 33% would leave. Surely that's the telling point.
It depends on the pollster, Charlie, because we were talking to a very good pollster earlier who said there's no enthusiasm for any change in a year. Maybe 10 years, they might be thinking about it.
Belinda de Lucia, let's bring you in. I'm sure you want to react to what Charlie said.
I mean, who would have thought that the UK wanting to run its own affairs and making our politicians more accountable would be so revolutionary? EU Parliament voted a majority to get rid of the vetoes, the last remaining scraps of democracy that the EU had. Now, luckily for EU citizens at the moment, you know, it means a treaty change to actually go forward. But that is the mood. The ever closer union. We have dodged a federalised, globalist, international, power-gobbling, anti-democratic organisation, and that's worth more than a few trade and travel perks for a few wealthy people in this country.
Hear, hear. Belinda de Lucia, Charlie Mullins, great to see you both.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Still lots more to come. In just a minute, I'm going to be joined by the Deputy PM, Oliver Dowden. Does he still stand by Sir Lindsay Hoyle after this week's chaos in the Commons? And I'll, of course, be getting his take on Lee Anderson's suspension. I'll be asking the former head of Unite, Len McCluskey, whether Starmer's Palestine problem will continue to be a headache for Labour, and if Jeremy Corbyn can make a comeback to rock the boat ahead of the next general election. I'll also be joined by former Foreign Secretary Sir Malcolm Rifkin as we mark 2 years on from the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Following the death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, what can the West do to stop Putin? I'm joined now in the studio by former General Secretary of the Unite Union, Len McCluskey. Len, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you for coming in.
Let's have a chat about Starmer, because I know you're not his biggest fan and you have been quite critical of the Labour leader in the past. You rated him as poor in 2021. How do you rate him now?
Even poorer.
I mean, but he's so far ahead in the polls, Len.
Well, and I'm sure his advisors are telling him that he's doing the right thing. The problem is, of course, he's been attacking my wing of the Labour Party. I've been a member of the Labour Party for 54 years, the left wing of the party, expelling people and creating an atmosphere of fear within the Labour Party. I mean, that has brought about a terrible, terrible divide, which is not needed.
Hang on a minute, though, Len. Let's not rewrite history here, because wasn't it Jeremy Corbyn, your very close friend, the man with whom you've written this poetry book, which we'll be discussing in just a moment? Jeremy Corbyn's the one that divided the Labour Party, isn't he? He's the one who caused MPs like Luciana Berger, because she was Jewish, to leave the party. He left a huge legacy of anti-Semitism within the party that Starmer's done a good job of cleaning up.
That simply isn't true. I know the media have tried to produce this imagery of, under Corbyn, Labour was an anti-Semitic party, but even the EHRC, who investigated Labour, and they were investigating an accusation that Labour was riddled with anti-Semitism. They found that that wasn't true.
You said that it's the media. It was Jewish Labour MPs were saying it, weren't they?
No, I mean,
yes, they were.
Well, lots of
Luciana Berger was saying it. Margaret Hodge was saying it. Lots of Jewish Labour MPs. Ian Austin, who's got Jewish heritage.
Yes, but you're talking
These people
about,
had to leave the party.
Well, Camilla, you're talking about right-wing Labour MPs who had a specific
about Jewish
agenda.
MPs, I think.
No, we're talking about right-wing Labour MPs who had an agenda to undermine the Corbyn leadership.
But why do you think Corbyn had a problem with Jewish Labour MPs leaving his party? Then?
Because they were right-wing.
They were right-wing?
He had a problem with the number.
Luciana Berger was right-wing. She went and joined a Social Democrat
let
party.
me answer your questions. Okay. It'll work better that way. The reality is that he had a problem with a number of right-wing MPs who sought to undermine his leadership. That's a reality. Now, of course, the whole anti-Semitism was examined and investigated by the EHRC. And read their report. They made it clear that there was no inherent anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. Corbyn had condemned anti-Semitism. He's fought against anti-Semitism all his life.
OK, so he may have condemned anti-Semitism, and I did hear him repeatedly refer to himself as somebody who has fought racism all his life. Why didn't he condemn Hamas and Hezbollah? I mean, he must regret describing Hamas as friends now that he's seen them rape and murder 1,400 Israelis.
You'll have to bring Jeremy on your programme and ask him.
Should
I've already condemned Hamas. I've condemned also the hypocrisy of everybody who wants to condemn one side but leaves Israel, the Israeli government, completely free from any condemnation, despite the fact that they break international law with the settlements in occupied territory. And what's going on in Gaza at the moment is just outrageous. It's slaughter. It's evil. And there's a saying that evil will only prosper. Evil will only prosper if good men and women stand silent. And I'll tell you this, Camilla, history will judge those who've been complicit in this evil and those who've stood on the sidelines and stayed silent.
But does any degree of sort of tragedy in Gaza justify projecting onto Big Ben the words "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," when it is so deeply offensive to Israeli and Jewish people?
The reality, of course, is that from the river to the sea is a slogan that seeks to create a Palestine that is viable, which is international law.
I think Jews and Israelis interpret it as wanting to wipe it from the map. From the river to the sea.
That isn't true, Camilla.
Because Hamas's founding statement wants to wipe Jews off the face of the earth, doesn't it?
Hamas doesn't speak for everyone. They certainly don't speak for all Jewish people, and they don't speak, for example, for the Palestine Authority. The reality of
Hamas are the Palestine Authority, though.
No, they're not. They're not.
So do you want Hamas to be deposed in Gaza?
I say that if we got rid of the settlements, the illegal settlements, and created a viable Palestine, which which is international law, then Hamas would vanish anyway, because we would have a proper recognition. Let me put this to you. Our government believes in a two-state solution. If it's not just lip service, then why don't they recognise the state of Palestine now? I've been listening to David Cameron with some interesting
Hamas
comments.
Because they're prescribed terrorists to down their weapons, and they want the hostages to be freed immediately. I mean, surely you support that, Len?
Absolutely, 100%. I also support what international law has been saying for over 50 years, condemning Israel for the occupation of settlements that are illegal.
We can take your point on
I would
settlements.
just ask you and your viewers...
But, of course, they haven't occupied Gaza since 2005.
To look at the map. The map that was drawn up in 1947, the map that was drawn up in 1967, supported by international law of what Israel is and what Palestine is. Look now at that map.
When Israel left Gaza in 2005, they left them with the infrastructure to really make something great of that country. We've had claims of genocide, which don't seem to be borne out in the population statistics for Gaza and indeed that area, because, of course, the population has gone up. So all of this talk about Israeli occupation, I take your point on settlements, but the Israelis haven't been there in almost 20 years, have they?
Camilla, you cannot take my point on settlements and just leave it at that.
No, but
let's
that's a
have a
separate
proper
point,
debate.
isn't it?
No, let's
because there's lots of Israelis and
Jews
Jews that don't think there should have been settlements.
Oh,
okay?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I think we can talk about that.
By the way, both here in Britain, all Jewish, in fact, the majority of the Jewish community here in Britain, I think, are appalled at the slaughter that's taken place.
When you said you have in Mossad the most sophisticated organisation in the world, much more so than MI5, MI6, CIA, are we really led to believe that they didn't know this was happening? What do you mean by that? That you think that Mossad knew that the October the 7th attacks were going to happen?
There is a conspiracy theory, not that I particularly support it. That said, the idea that Mossad, and the Egyptians, of course, say that they told Mossad something was happening, and that the idea that Mossad, this highly sophisticated security system, didn't know was happening is difficult to believe.
But then you're veering into the territory of that conspiracy theory of suggesting that the Israelis knew about October the 7th and let it happen so that they could then attack Gaza.
That's precisely...
You don't buy into that, do you?
No, and that's precisely why you've quoted something that I was making the point that people are raising that issue. They're also raising the issue that did Hamas not know that that type of an attack was going to bring the incredible response from Israel in the way that it is, i.e. Hamas playing games as well. There's all kinds of issues. What I do know is that there are thousands and thousands of women and children being slaughtered at the moment in Gaza.
Yes.
And we're standing round playing games in Parliament about procedures.
Well, actually, there's a report today to say that they may be quite close to a 6-week ceasefire.
Yes, well, what
and
we need...
also there are women, aren't there, in Gazan tunnels, Hamas tunnels, who are probably still being raped and tortured as we speak.
The reality is that the only way to resolve this issue is for the international community, in particular America and Britain, to insist that Netanyahu, almost an international criminal himself, dismantles the settlements, withdraws to the 1967 Green Line and allows the creation of a Palestinian viable state. That's the way to resolve it.
You said at the beginning of the conversation you thought it was wrong for the likes of Corbyn and I assume also Abbott, MacDonald to be expelled from the Labour Party. Would you like to see them back in then?
Of course. I mean,
so if there's a sort of left-wing caucus that tries to challenge Starmer either now or if he becomes Prime Minister, will you lend them your support? Would you like to depose Starmer?
It's not a question of deposing Starmer. It's a question about Starmer has been elected on a radical programme that he's completely ditched now. He fooled everyone. Untruthful. The reality is, what kind of Labour government do we want? We want one that changes for the good of ordinary working people.
I know, but that Labour government that was proposed by Jeremy Corbyn was spectacularly annihilated in the 2019 election.
Well, don't rule out 2017. 13 million people voted for Corbyn.
But
more people, Camilla.
More people wanted Boris Johnson to be Prime Minister than Jeremy Corbyn.
Here's an interesting fact for you. More people voted for Jeremy Corbyn in England than voted for Tony Blair. The fact of the matter is that 2019 was all about Brexit.
What are you saying?
Else.
You object to Starmer because you think he's some sort of Thatcherite?
Well, there's no doubt that he's been captured by the establishment and the right wing of the party, and he won't do anything for ordinary working people.
Len, let's just have a quick word about this book. Very briefly, Len, you've written this book with Jeremy Corbyn, so you're both poets, or at least admirers of poetry.
We're very much admirers of poetry, and this is an effort to say to people, look, poetry is not just for posh people, it's for everyone. So embrace poetry because it's got a fantastic emotional pull.
I can agree with you on that, Len McCluskey. Thank you very much indeed for coming in this morning.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week, and it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama.
Yeah.
And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened?
I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States, and asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting, and that you had... Obviously, I was in no pain or anything like that. I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why, if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first. But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions.
No.
We did not experiment with nitrogen. But what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm delighted to be joined now by Deputy PM Oliver Dowden, the Conservative MP for Hertsmere. Mr Dowden, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you for joining me. Let's kick off with Lee Anderson then.
Good morning, Camilla.
Is he an Islamophobe as far as you're concerned?
No, I don't believe that Lee Anderson is an Islamophobe, but
Why
words
are you
matter,
suspending
and
him
the
then?
choice of words that he used, the choice of words that he used was not appropriate. He was given the opportunity to apologise, didn't take that opportunity, and therefore the Chief Whip took the decision to remove the whip from him.
But why would you remove the whip from him when you say he isn't an Islamophobe? I mean, surely it's a free country. He can express himself how he likes. He said that he thought he expressed himself clumsily, but as far as I can tell, he hasn't said anything really that Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, has said.
Well, I think the difference between what he said and what Suella said was about specifically targeting one individual. And believe me, I have huge problems with Sadiq Khan. I experience it pretty much every day. His war on the motorists or his failure to build houses in London because of his absurd affordability requirements. But linking the two through religion, I think that's something that Lee himself has accepted. He was given that opportunity to apologise, and he didn't do so, so the whip has been suspended.
Why wasn't the whip suspended from Zach Goldsmith during the 2016 campaign, or at least why wasn't he sanctioned by the Tory party when he made very similar remarks about Sadiq Khan? He said about the London mayor that he was giving cover to extremists. He said Sadiq Khan had, quotes, given platforms, oxygen and even cover over and over again to those who seek to do our police and capital harm. He then suggested that Khan had, quotes, tried to silence questions about his links to extremists by shamelessly accusing anyone who raises them of being Islamophobic. Zach Goldsmith has been far more strident in his criticism of Sadiq Khan's links to, quotes, extremists than Lee Anderson. So why wasn't he removed of the whip and sanctioned by the Tory party? He was running as your London mayor at the time.
Well, Camilla, we're going back quite a long way, and you're testing my memory of what happened during that campaign.
Well, I've just
what I would
told
say
you
about
what happened.
the quotes that you use, what I would say about the quotes that you've used there and relayed to me is that there is this difference between, by the way, I support robust political debate and robust exchange of views and robust questions being asked, as opposed to linking specifically to this point about Sadiq Khan's mates and the concern about the implication of that. As I say, I don't believe that Lee Anderson was motivated by Islamophobia, but there is concern about that language. He was given the opportunity to apologise. By his own admission, he said that it was clumsy language. His failure to do so led to the whip being suspended from him.
But I'm just pointing out the inconsistency in the disciplinary process here, that Zach Goldsmith said, actually in stronger terms, that Sadiq Khan was linked to extremists than Lee Anderson has, and yet he faced no sanction. Is it maybe that you feel that Lee Anderson isn't quite the right fit for the Tory party, that he's a bit rough around the edges, that he speaks his mind, and it's all a bit too sort of honest for the constituency and indeed for the Tory public?
No, I mean, nothing could be further from the truth than that. And actually, I have great sympathy and indeed agree with the underlying sentiments, although I wouldn't choose their language, from both Suella Braverman and from Lee Anderson. You and I have talked before about how we grew up in Hertfordshire and the values of the country that we know and love. I don't think any of us would have imagined that in our lifetimes, debates in Parliament were being threatened by threats of violence against members of Parliament. And this forms part of a chain that we have seen, whether it's Jews in my constituency afraid to walk the streets because they're showing symbols of their religion, or it's those hate-filled marches where people still walk alongside them on the marches but don't call it out. And we, all of us, of course there's a law enforcement response to this, but there's also underlying questions about the sort of society we live in and all of our responsibility to call this kind of conduct out.
I know, but Mr. Dowd, I mean, it's all very well giving a commentary of what's going on. We're all familiar with what's going on. We all saw Big Ben lit up with the words "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free" a few days ago. What are you actually going to do about it?
Well, that was totally unacceptable, using that that clearly anti-Semitic trope. And I was waiting for a while to come on to your interview. I was listening to your interview with Len McCluskey. There still seems to be some sort of equivocation about that. It is undoubtedly anti-Semitic. The police are obviously operationally independent, but I know that the Home Secretary has taken this up with the police. What I would say in relation to a lot of these, and I often find myself discussing this with constituents, just because immediate action isn't taken doesn't mean action isn't being taken. So, for example, it is a case that there have been over 600 arrests. There are over 200 ongoing live investigations in relation to some of these offensive conduct. For example, one of them has been publicised, these people that were wearing the parachutists' insignia on their clothing. So action is being taken. It's not always obvious that that is being taken immediately.
Well, but shouldn't it have been taken immediately in the case of projecting onto Big Ben? I mean, that is probably one of the most recognisable London landmarks. Shouldn't it have been taken at the time? I mean, shouldn't the police have stopped it? Yes,
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you, and they should have done. And the Home Secretary has made that point to the police. Obviously, we live in a society, and I think it is right that we live in a society where the police are operationally independent. They have to take the decisions as to how they conduct their operations. But the Home Secretary has left the police in no doubt at all that they should take action in respect of this.
But this must be frustrating for you, because we read in the Sunday Express today that this operation to police these marches is costing 30 million. I had your former colleague, Suella Braverman, in the studio a few weeks ago saying the police have the powers to stop this, and they aren't using them. So how much pressure is the Prime Minister and others piling on the police to say use these powers, stop these marches, stop people from chanting these anti-Semitic slogans in the street? Because I'm afraid the government does look quite weak on this. We had Tower Bridge closed down yesterday. We've got these offensive slogans projected onto Big Ben. Why aren't the government doing more? Why aren't you forcing the police to use the powers they have?
Well, I think there's two elements. So one is that putting pressure on the police to take action. As I said to you in my previous answer, it genuinely is the case that the police are taking lots of action, over 600 arrests. There is always more for them to do, and we're pushing for that. In addition, we're looking at gaps where there are insufficient powers. So, for example, clambering onto war memorials and making sure that is clearly illegal. There's a more fundamental question. There is an issue of debate. I do have some sympathy for people that say we should just ban these marches altogether. I think we have freedom of expression in this country, so I wouldn't favour banning the marches altogether, but I do favour robust policing. As I say, sometimes you don't see that immediately, but it is these people are being held to account. And I think what you'll see in the coming weeks and months is more and more of these prosecutions finding their way into court, and people will see there is action that is flowing from it.
OK, final question on Mr Anderson, Mr Dowden. Would you like to see him join Reform? Nigel Farage says he's welcome there with open arms.
No, I certainly wouldn't, and I think that all of us who share the concerns and the anger about how what is happening in our democracy right now need a government that is robust in response to it. I don't have confidence, given what you saw last week, the meeting that Keir Starmer had with the Speaker, him urging him to change parliamentary procedure. I don't have confidence that there will be that robustness from Keir Starmer. In the end, that's the choice, Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer, and I think we should unite together.
If you don't want to see Lee Anderson go to Reform, what should he do then? Is he going to be allowed back into the Conservative Party if he shows more contrition?
Well, that's a matter for the Chief Whip, but we set out the reasons why the whip was drawn was that failure to apologise. That's a matter for Lee Anderson.
You can't rule out him having the whip returned. He may have the whip returned, will he, if he apologises?
No, I certainly wouldn't rule that out, but that's a matter for the Chief Whip.
OK. Mr Dowden, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Elon Musk has announced that the first patients to receive a groundbreaking brain implant from Neuralink is recovering well.
This is all a bit odd. The product, called telepathy, uses a robot to surgically place a computer chip in a region of the brain that controls movement.
Yes, Elon Musk says that the first goal is to enable people to control a phone or a computer just by thinking. He says that initial tests show promising signs of brain activity, meaning that patients with paralysis could one day overcome their conditions.
Not sure about this one. Joining us to discuss this breakthrough is applied futurist Tom Cheesewright. Tom, this sounds, well, slightly terrifying.
I certainly think a lot of people will be thinking this is something out of a sci-fi horror rather than reality. But this is a technology that's been a long time coming. We've been developing direct brain-computer interfaces for a long time, mostly for the sort of therapeutic reasons that are the initial goal, at least, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, to allow people who are perhaps quadriplegic to have direct control via their brains of initially a smartphone and maybe ultimately artificial limbs or a wheelchair.
It does seem fascinating how quickly this technology is moving on. I saw demonstrations perhaps a year or two ago of people playing a very simple Pong game just by thinking, moving sort of one line on a screen up and down. This seems like potentially there has been a breakthrough that means far more complex things can be controlled just by thinking.
Well, there's lots of different aspects to this technology. The initial attempts to interface with the brain used actually quite thick prongs almost that went into the brain, and they were quite solid, and so if the brain moved, they could potentially cause damage.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm delighted to be joined now by Sir Malcolm Rifkin, former Foreign Secretary from 1995 to 1997, but an MP for a lot longer than that. Sir Malcolm, lovely to see you.
Thank you.
2 years on from the Ukraine invasion, hard to believe actually, 2 years on. What do you think is the prospect of peace there?
Well, I think you have to start by saying, what does Putin privately think?
Yeah.
What did he intend when he started this ghastly war 2 years ago? He thought it would be all over within a week and a half.
Yes.
Not even a war, a special military operation was the phrase used. It's been a total disaster for the Ukrainians, but it's been an even greater disaster for Putin, because he ends up having been humiliated by a weaker country,
yes,
being able to actually stop the Russians and indeed reverse some of their gains. But also, this was all about NATO and the question of NATO membership. What happens? Sweden and Finland,
yes,
who've been neutral for 150 years, are now members of NATO.
Yeah, NATO now strengthened.
Well, the Baltic Sea is now a NATO sea, yes, with only a very small Russian coast. Think of the gas industry, one of the most important industries for the country. Gazprom, one of the biggest companies in the world, is approaching bankruptcy. 80% of its revenue has been lost.
Agree with you, although the Russian economy is booming.
Only because of military expansion. That doesn't help ordinary Russians.
I mean, I read today 7.5% of GDP being spent on defences in Russia, which is an extraordinary
They've virtually doubled their defence expenditure, which shows how successful the Ukrainians have been.
OK, so we congratulate the Ukrainians for being successful. Having said that, we've seen Putin basically laugh in the face of the Western world with the, I think, state-sponsored assassination of Alexei Navalny. How does that change the picture?
Well, the question of the assassination of Navalny is not spitting in the face of the world, it's spitting in the face of the Russian people.
Yeah.
Because he did that because he was frightened of Navalny. When Navalny was free to operate in a normal political way, huge numbers of people were supporting him, and Putin began to panic. And this is a sign, yet all these things that Putin does, ultimately they're a sign of his weakness.
Yes.
Like having to have what is in fact a phony election. Why does he have to go through this farce of an election when everybody knows nobody else is able to stand against him? Why? Because he likes to pretend that he is a democratic leader that has legitimacy. And the Russian public aren't stupid. They know perfectly well he hasn't.
Although we haven't had an uprising in response to Navalny, because we can't have an uprising, because obviously 200 or 300 people were arrested in Moscow the morning after. I remember us speaking before on this show, and you were talking about being quite confident that Putin would be deposed at some point. I mean, we see Putin's reign ending either with him being deposed or indeed dying in office. What do you think the prospect is now? Not least because I think since we spoke, Prigozhin's obviously been assassinated as well.
Well, all these things that happen are not signs of Putin's strength. I know they seem to be in one sense, but they're signs of weakness, that he has to behave in this way, blowing up one of his opponents in an aircraft, killing a guy who's already locked up in an Arctic prison. Now, the fact that he has to go beyond that and dispose of them by murder, that shows ultimately his weakness. Now, Putin can hang on for a while. I mean, Russia doesn't have a Politburo like it had in the Soviet days when they got rid of Khrushchev very easily. But the people around Putin know that he has not been able to deliver this easy conflict that would destroy Ukraine and restore them to being part of the Russian Federation. Now, I'm not underestimating the problem the Ukrainians have, because they are a far smaller country. Russia is a country of 130 million people. Ukraine has about 30 million. When the war began, the Ukrainian army, do you know how big it was? About 20, 30,000. It's now got over 500,000 troops.
Yes.
It's now the most powerful army in Europe.
So you seem quite confident
in terms of numbers.
President Zelensky and his troops forcing the Russians out, or do you think ultimately there'll have to be a carving up of territory?
Well, I don't know what will happen ultimately, because so many options are possible. But what is increasingly likely is that the Ukrainians in the short term are going to be not able to recover all the territory they lost over the last few years. And because it started with the occupation of Crimea in 2014, they don't seem to have the military strength to do that. But what we have seen over the last year is very significant for Russia as well as for Ukraine. The Ukrainians have been superb at defending their own territory. Much more difficult, and it's always known to military people, that to actually advance and occupy your enemy's territory requires far more troops, far more weapons, whereas to defend, you just simply dig in and stop. Now, that's what the Russians have been doing over the whole of the last year. It may be the Ukrainians have to do a bit of that as well. And then it will be clear to Putin that he has no chance of occupying any further kind of Ukrainian territory.
Let's just move to domestic matters. In a way, domestic matters influenced by foreign policy. The scenes in the Commons last week, the scenes of From the River to the Sea, Palestine Will Be Free being projected onto Big Ben. I mean, if you don't mind me saying, you're quite a prominent Jewish former politician. How did that feel, seeing that on the mother of all parliaments?
Well, my own personal view is, first of all, the police have to be allowed operational freedom. I think they made a mistake on this occasion, because not just because of the River to the Sea slogan. I think anybody attempting to put a slogan on the walls of Big Ben for political reasons, whatever the subject is, if the police have the means to stop them doing that, they should do that right away, regardless of the subject matter. That's part of the building of Parliament. It's not there to advertise political slogans, whatever the subject. On the question of the House of Commons, look, we know that if you have a free Parliament, not just in Britain, but in real democracies, parliaments sometimes misbehave. Mistakes are made. People behave in a way that doesn't look very impressive to the general public. Remember always the alternative. The alternative is the Russian Duma, the Chinese parliament, where you have hundreds of people. They sit there like dummies. They all vote exactly the same way, never a word of criticism, beautifully behaved. Is that exactly the kind of House of Commons we want? So, OK, accept that occasionally it's overdone. Most of the time, Parliament is there to represent not the government, but the public as a whole, and there will be deep disagreements and at times of high emotion, which this obviously is.
You lived through these times of high emotion during the 80s, you know, under Thatcher, of course, there were deep divisions. But this threatening behaviour towards MPs, and particularly the notion of Jewish MPs feeling threatened, or at least MPs in constituencies that have a lot of Jewish voters feeling threatened, must sort of professionally worry you, but also personally worry you.
Well, of course, that is hugely distasteful and hugely concerning. Remember the increase in anti-Muslim incidents in Britain has gone up 300% over the same period of time. Not as much as anti-Semitism, but most of the anti-Semitism is actually anti the Israeli government.
Yes.
It is a difference of view, very deeply held, as to Israel's government and Israel's policies, and that is inevitably what causes high emotions on both sides. And what we all need to do, particularly in a country like Britain, which is famous for its tolerance. I mean, London is the most tolerant capital city in Europe and in the wider world. A lot of people will say that, including people from other countries. So that has to be maintained. And there is a risk. Not the general public. The vast majority of British people remain despising the bigots and zealots, whichever side of the argument they come from.
Is Netanyahu a problem for Israel moving forward with the question about proportionality? Should he go?
Well, that's for the Israelis, but we know now already that something like 80% of Israelis believe he should go. And I think what will happen, he will remain in power during this period of the fighting. When the fighting stops, and it will stop, whether it's days, weeks, or even a couple of months, it will stop. Then the war coalition will break up, and although he will refuse to resign, remember what happened when he tried to bring forward these judicial reforms? 500,000 Israelis, week after week, month after month, demonstrating. It'll be twice as large. And what if they're sensible? They'll be demanding is not Netanyahu, you must go. It will be Netanyahu, there must be a general election. If you think you have the support of the Israelis, have an election, and we'll all find out whether you're right or wrong. Much more difficult for him to refuse then.
Final, very, very quick question, if you could be brief as possible, Sir Malcolm. Talking of elections, we're looking to the US. Donald Trump has done very well in Haley's state yesterday. Joe Biden, too old to run again?
I don't believe this stuff. You know, first of all, Henry Kissinger lived till he was 100, and his brain was 100% clear right throughout.